The light at the end of the tunnel is a phenomenon invented by people standing on the brink of life and death. It is hard to believe, but here it is. The tunnel, right before your eyes. He died. The last thing he remembered was a room where there was no one else. The man looked at the city from the window, from a bird's eye view. I lay down in bed, feeling my body getting heavier. Poisoning, murder. Many options were spinning around in his head, because so many people wanted him dead. Once he was a king. Everything around him reminds him of this. The crown behind the glass and the sword that saved his life more than once. All that remains is to come to terms with death. Because the reasons can no longer be known, no matter how much one would like to, there remains only the hope that at the end, there will not be a choir of babies with wings. As the light became brighter, the man became more clearly visible and said, "Congratulations, sir, madam. You have a healthy baby boy. Honey, hold the baby for a moment, I want to look at him," said the woman who had been holding the baby in her arms until then, and he was finally able to look at her. The light at the end of the tunnel is the light that comes through women. But let's not dwell on that now, the former king thought, as his new parents discussed his appearance. Wherever I am, I understand their language, and this is a good sign. The thought flashed through his head, and his gaze turned to his parents. His mother was a charming woman with a pleasant smile. She radiated maternal love and warmth. His father seemed stern to him because of his pointed jaw, but he still said in a friendly manner, "Hi, baby, I'm your daddy. Come on, say daddy." The baby did not answer, because he had only recently been born, which his mother immediately reported. It doesn't matter, thought the baby, looking around the modest room. His gaze caught on the armor on the wall and the lit wax candle, and he thought. Everything was so unfamiliar that it caused misunderstanding and questions. The gaze slid from the wooden walls to the parents, clung to details, and the questions grew more and more. After a few minutes, the boy was able to formulate a single question. "Where am I?" A house with a thatched roof standing alone in the forest. That's what he hadn't seen yet, but where he would now live. As the weeks went by, despite the gentleness, the reins of power in the family belonged to the mother, Alice. Father Reynolds proved to be a reliable and charismatic man, if you ignore the occasional childish antics. Although the former king was grateful to fate that he was born into a loving family, he still faced difficulties that he would not wish even on his enemies. The inability to control certain bodily functions was disorienting, making one's own body feel like a fleshy prison. But he had no choice but to accept the role of a baby and get used to new sensations. Of course, some interactions between mother and child could not help but be confusing, but the mental fortitude of his past life and the hope that all this was just a dream kept him sane. It seemed to him that he had found himself in the distant past, in a more primitive period of human existence. The everyday carrying of weapons was what struck him and was apparently perceived here as the norm. Walking with his mother around the city, the little boy looked with interest at the people and the goods they sold, trying to understand the foundations of the new world. The medicines, called potions here, were sold quite legally, which surprised the baby, but his mother interpreted his concentration as fatigue. They headed home amid the noise of people haggling and trading. Lying in bed, the baby thought about the need to learn more about the place where he would now live. Over the past weeks, he had become confident that he understood what to expect from this world. His thoughts were interrupted by his father, who decided to play with his son at the most inopportune moment, just after coming home from work. "What are you going to do if he falls?" the mother cried as Ray tossed the baby up to the ceiling. As expected from such a fragile body, such overloads were beyond his strength and caused not only nausea but also dizziness. The former king was distressed at the thought that he had been incapacitated by a simple game that his father had thought was fun. "I think our baby is having fun," the man said, still holding his son in the air with his arms outstretched. The kid couldn't say anything in response, sensing that the game was about to continue and he would feel even worse. And he turned out to be right, because Reynolds immediately began to whirl around the house with him, entertaining himself more than the son he was trying to amuse. "Ray!" Mother screamed, afraid of what might happen next, and for good reason. The child's vestibular system, unfamiliar with such overloads, begged for mercy. The baby felt sick, but he held on, showing no fear. The pain in his knee told him they were both done, but only Art got it, his knee hitting one of the walls. This was enough for the father to finally stop and pay attention to the state of the child and the enraged wife behind him. The baby burst into tears from fear and pain, unable to bear the abuse that someone called a game. After a few slaps, Ray realized his mistake, and the baby ended up in the safe arms of his mother, who kept saying, "It's okay, my baby. Let Mummy fix you up." A small greenish firefly jumped out of Alice's palm and landed on her skinned knee, healing the wound. Art watched the real magic. still not understanding what was happening and how. "That's much better," she said, lifting the boy to eye level to make sure he was okay. At that moment, the baby realized that he was wrong and that he knew absolutely nothing about this world. In his past life, he was a king. He was respected and feared. Soldiers and ordinary people bowed their heads before him. He led armies, bringing them closer to victory, even when it seemed impossible. He didn't care which country's representative was in front of him. The king emerged victorious from any duel. But even despite all his achievements, he was never proud of himself. But now he has been given a new life and he has finally experienced this feeling. Pride in himself. The body became more obedient and finally the baby was able to move independently, albeit crawling. His parents were worried that he might get hurt or fall, but they still allowed him to explore the world. "Ray, make sure he doesn't hit his head on the corner," Alice worried, watching her son get closer and closer to the wall. "Don't let him near the shelf." But neither of them had time to do anything when the baby crashed into a mirror that he hadn't noticed. Finally, he was able to see himself. For the first time in his life, he saw his own reflection. "Look, Art is looking at himself in the mirror." The parents' faces lit up with emotion. Art, too cute a name for a former king. The boy still couldn't get used to the fact that they were now calling him that, even after several months. He also couldn't help but admit that in his new incarnation he looked charming. "Be careful, future ladies. Prepare to have your hearts broken." The baby grinned at his reflection and burst out laughing. His parents joined in, thinking that he just liked playing with himself. It was evening, time to go to bed. The boy closed his eyes, pretending to fall asleep. "Sweet dreams, my little Art." His mother whispered goodbye, kissing her son goodnight. As soon as the door closed, the boy's eyes widened, ready to put the plan into action. "The mission has begun," he announced to no one in particular, sitting up on the bed. He looked around the room, looking for something that would help him get out and making sure his mother didn't come back to check on him. Trying not to make any noise, he threw the blanket onto the floor so that the landing would be soft. His weak arms didn't allow him to simply pull himself up on the wooden side, but the boy was determined. Puffing and struggling, he managed to roll over the edge and hung awkwardly on the partition. A little more effort, and finally he was on the floor, landing silently on the blanket he had thrown out earlier. Mom thinks he's sleeping, which means there's only an hour before she comes to check on him, so she needs to hurry. Having quietly left the room, the baby moved further down the corridor, trying not to make any unnecessary sounds. Behind the half-open door to the kitchen stood my mother, washing dishes and humming a song. The goal was close. The right door was within reach. All that was left was to quickly get to the right room and hide. Constantly looking back at Alice and monitoring the situation, the boy rushed towards the light. Having looked into the room and made sure that there was no one there, he finally made his way inside. In front of him was a small office with just one bookshelf and a wooden desk. Finally, the goal has been achieved, and this cannot but please. The kid could be proud that he had gotten here unnoticed, and could move on to the second part of the plan. Approaching the cupboard, the boy examined the books there. There were very few of them, but this should be enough to learn the basics and understand what kind of world he would have to live in. Although it was not the first time that the former king had sneaked into this room, he was still happy with his success each time and tried to learn as much as possible before he was missed. So he hurried to open the next book, studying the map of the continent of Dicathan, where he was born. It was divided into 3 parts: the elven kingdom of Eleanor, hidden deep in the forest; the huge underground kingdom of Darv, which was also the homeland of the gnomes; and Sapin, the kingdom of people in which he was born. Taking up the new book, the boy noted that the monarchical system in this world was the same as in his previous one. There was only one difference: the throne was passed on by inheritance, not by merit. This world was clearly less developed than its previous one, but there was something magical and completely unusual, new in it. The reason for the lack of progress was simple: it was simply not needed. Taking out the next book, he only confirmed his suspicions that there was magic in his new world. Something new and so inexplicable that it was capable of stopping people's desire for development. Having opened the book, the baby became immersed in reading. He ran his gaze over the unfamiliar but understandable symbols, stopping at the place where he had left off last time. In his past world, there was a life force called Kai that could be used to strengthen the body and weapons. There was a similar force here, but it was called mana. The only difference he noticed while studying the book was that Kai was concentrated inside a person, while mana was present throughout the world. Life force could be used by anyone with rigorous training, but mana could only be used by 1 in 100 people if the body had a genetic predisposition to it. Mana could also be used in different ways. The 2 most common methods are empowerment and spellcasting. Amplifiers strengthen their body with mana, which helps them gain incredible strength, defense, and maneuverability, which is best for combat. But the downside is the limited range of attacks. Spellcasters emit mana into the outside world, which allows them to subjugate the environment and control it as the magician wishes. But before that, they need to fill their own core from the outside world in order to cast a spell. Magicians like Alice are called deviants, or more precisely, emitters. What makes them unique is that they use restorative mana, which helps heal wounds, like when Art got hurt. The book also said that the awakening of magicians falls between early and late adolescence. Then the mana core manifests itself, which is very similar to the Kai center that was in the former king's past world. From an early age, children were taught to form a chi center through meditation, gathering fragments of life force within and moving them to one point. The boy wondered if he could do this while in another world. He brought his hands together and closed his eyes, listening to the sensations and trying to reproduce what he had done many times. A whitish glow began to shine between the palms, obeying the will of the owner and forming a ball of light. Before the little boy had time to rejoice at what he was doing, someone's hands lifted him off the ground. "There you are, Art, making me worry." Of course, it was the mother who noticed the child was missing. Alice stopped mid-sentence, noticing that something was wrong with her son. He's about to start his journey as the greatest magician ever, and his mother is ruining the mood by worrying about her son not being able to go to the toilet. Although, in fact, he did not have any particular problems with this, as evidenced by the corresponding smell. Alice decided that it was simply time to change the diaper, confusing the adult, who was not yet accustomed to the body of a child, with her optimism and even joy. It turned out that the baby was so focused that he didn't even notice that he had soiled his diaper. Time passed, and nothing changed in the office where Alice sat. She pulled the diary she had kept since Art's birth from the shelf and ran her fingers over the cover, wondering where to begin writing. This was always difficult, because everything seemed so important, and all the books in the world would not be enough to describe all the events and feelings that I wanted to preserve on the pages. Still, she decided where to start, dipped her pen in ink, opened to a blank page and began filling it out. "It's been a little over 2 years, but I still feel like I'm learning something new about my child every day," she said, drawing out the first sentence with a smile on her lips. She knew that Arthur would become an even more charming child than he was now. His smile is infectious to everyone around him. Every time he does something new, achieves goals, he rejoices like a child. His parents are also happy, having long noticed that their son has an almost intelligent look, perhaps not in keeping with his age. Alice believed that she had to be a strict and reliable mother, so that Art would not have any troubles in the future. But she knew that she could always rely on her husband. She was just carrying the laundry when she heard Ray playing with his son. The games were not age-appropriate and frightened the mother that the child might get hurt. The little boy swung the stick as if he had a real sword in his hands, and his dad watched with a smile and a bit of admiration. Only Alice was clearly against such games, scolded her husband for it, and scared her son a little when she appeared out of nowhere nearby, radiating an aura of death. "For God's sake, I stopped him when he tried to teach the child to fight," she wrote in her diary and sighed. And yet, she smiled every time she thought about it. Such childishness. Walking around the city with his mother, the baby seemed to see him for the first time every time. His gaze clung to people, to signs and to houses. He even tried to ask his mother to go to the gun shop, but she did not understand or simply did not want to go there. She couldn't help but notice the child's interest in the small merchants who stopped in the center of their city. That's why they went shopping more often than necessary. She had no intention of spoiling him, but she couldn't ignore her child. It was easier to think that it was for educational purposes than to realize that she couldn't refuse him. Looking at Arthur, she became more and more interested in who he would become in the future when he grew up. "I have no doubt that Art, like his father, will want to become an adventurer," Alice concluded, remembering the times when Ray worked in this field. The excitement did not leave her, because being an adventurer meant being in constant danger and the risk of never returning was too great. Even at this age, he shows interest in books, which is probably why every time when no one is around, the baby sneaks into the office. Alice was already thinking about moving Arthur's crib into the study so that she wouldn't have to watch him to make sure he didn't get hurt. Perhaps the idea was good, but each time it was put off until later, and then forgotten until the next escape. The woman closed the diary, finishing her thought. She put the pen in the inkwell and, with a sense of duty accomplished, got ready to leave. The diary remained lying there, waiting for a new day and new entries, as if wanting to learn more about the lives of its owners and about what it itself could not see. Days passed. The boy was already standing boldly on the bench by the window and watching something outside the window. His interested gaze was not fixed on the landscape, but was directed at his father, who was training in the yard. Reynolds pulled off his glove and prepared for the daily exercises he did to stay in shape. Arthur learned by watching those around him, including the training of his father, a true adventurer, which is what he wanted to become. He had learned a lot over the past few years, but every day brought him something new and unique. The anticipation of a new day and new knowledge forced the boy to get up earlier so as not to miss anything. Here, Dad starts to read some kind of spell, putting his hands in front of him and closing his eyes. The words are incomprehensible, but his concentration is at its limit, and this attracts the eye, prompting you to wait for the continuation. And then something started to happen. The stones in front of Reynolds began to shake and rise slightly above the ground. Apparently, this was what was supposed to happen. The father's eyes widened, focusing on what was happening. The boy held his breath, waiting for further developments with interest. The stones shot up into the air at lightning speed, obeying the caster's gesture, and froze, awaiting further instructions. The boy froze, watching his father's actions without stopping. Step to the side, a piercing gaze as if looking out for every object subject to magic. A swing that sends a shockwave through the air, accompanied by a cry from the mage and a blast of mana. With a quiet pop, the stones fly several meters and fall. The wind calms down. Disappointment is evident on the face of the child, who clearly expected more from such preparation and concentration. The hand could clearly have thrown much further, but Ray was happy with this. He turns towards his son, only now noticing that he had been watched this whole time. "Your dad is amazing," he stated, giving his son a thumbs up as if he was supposed to be absolutely delighted by this little show. 3 minutes of extreme concentration to throw something that you can physically throw with less effort. Art was genuinely perplexed, trying not to even look in his father's direction so as not to show his disappointment. A warm palm fell on his head, slightly tousling his already shaggy crown. Alice noticed that the boy had been watching his father all this time and sat down next to him. "Oh God, he's ruined the front yard again," she sighed, shaking her head. Meanwhile, Ray, having finished his magic training, picked up the discarded gloves from the ground and pulled them onto his hands, preparing to continue. The mother pulled her son closer, smiling with the corner of her lips, still looking at her husband without taking her eyes off him. Remembering that Reynolds was an amplifier, the kid became curious about what he himself would become when the Manticore awakened. The father closed his eyes, concentrating on something known only to him, and, as if mentally following a falling leaf, opened his eyes. There was a sense of power in every movement he made, and the speed of his raised fist blurred the silhouette, turning it into a black, shapeless strip. The impact, the whistle of the cutting wind, mixed with the rustling of leaves disturbed by the shockwave. The legs came into play, moving with such speed that it seemed as if there were several of them at once. An elbow strike. Another, as if the man were fighting an invisible opponent. He practiced his blows as if his life depended on it, and perhaps it did. The grass pressed closer to the ground, blown away by the gust of wind from the father's last movement. And then everything became quiet. The man exhaled, catching his breath and assessing his own indicators and the state of his body. Arthur understood that his father was a true adventurer who had honed his skills over many years. These thoughts brought a smile to his lips, and pride arose in his head for the man who was so similar to him from the past. With a clear conscience, the boy turned away and was going to go to school so as not to lag behind his father, even if he was in the body of a child. But then, an obstacle appeared before him, expected, but for some reason forgotten during the observation. The boy looked down and thought about what to do next. It would seem that the height is not great, but a fear crept into his mind that is not characteristic of an adult, belonging to the child that he now is. You need to fight this. You need to focus on what to do, and not on your emotions. It's just a bench that Art somehow climbed onto, which has now become an insurmountable obstacle. The baby dropped to his knees, the floor became closer, but there was still a risk of falling. The trembling in his body prevented him from moving normally, but the boy still dangled one leg, still not feeling any support. His hesitant attempts to get down were noticed by his mother, who had previously been watching her husband training with her son. "Your eyes are half closed," she noted, not realizing that it was from fear rather than fatigue. "Looks like someone needs a nap." She picked her son up and kissed him on the cheek, stopping his attempt to get down on his own, although he almost succeeded. Of course, he didn't want to sleep at all, so he tried to switch Alice's attention to the study with books, but it was useless. The mother was adamant in her desire to put her son to sleep. "Maybe later," she promised, but Art wasn't happy with that option. Although he thought that there was no chance, he still decided to use his childish trump card, even though it was beneath his dignity. He moved his mother a little further away so that she could see his expression. "Please, Mom. Books," he drawled. putting all his charm into the words, which even made his eyes sparkle, adding to the stunning image. The mother, struck down by the unexpected attack, still tried to maintain her face and the desire to put her son to bed. But the armor was increasingly cracking and breaking into pieces. It seemed to her that Art began to emit an incomprehensible light. Maybe that's why it was so hard to look at him and so impossible to tear her eyes away. But then she gathered her strength, lifted the baby up on outstretched arms, intending to stop his manipulations. Breathing heavily and trying to recover from the mental battle, she was still trying to come to her senses. I had to refuse him. I had to stand my ground. But how could I, when my beloved child was looking at me like that? Okay, you can play in the office for a bit. She finally gave in, and it even became easier to breathe. I'm a bad mother. Boys his age are always playing. We need to make a nursery for him, Alice said, and Art rejoiced, enjoying a small victory. It is not humiliating. A great warrior must use all the weapons in his arsenal, and so the little boy sits and reads a book just as he wanted. Mother remained standing in the doorway, fully admitting defeat and even enjoying the fact that she had lost. Suddenly, a crash was heard from the yard, which made Alice shudder and immediately turn to the source of the sound. Your father better not cut down another tree. I'll be back soon. She sighed resignedly and went out to check what her husband had done to the front yard this time. It was high time for the boy to try out the greatest achievement of this time, in addition to the accumulated knowledge. He has made progress in forming a mana core, which will help him cast spells in the future. For the past 2 years, Art has been gathering tens of thousands of tiny fragments of mana throughout his body in order to succeed. It wasn't easy to get them together in the solar plexus area, but here it is, the result of hard training. He understood why the core only awakened in adolescence and thought it would take him about the same amount of time. These fragments are coming together so slowly that there are no other options left. The leaves rustled outside the window, the wind blew, and the monotonous sounds helped me concentrate. Focusing mana is a challenging task for a child's body and mind, but it doesn't mean training is out of the question. You need to concentrate, collect all the particles together more precisely, even more precisely. These 2 years were not wasted. With each passing day, Arthur got things easier and faster. Almost finished, just a little bit left and the 2-year goal will be achieved. Meanwhile, the mother came into the backyard and saw her husband trying to hold up a tree that had been broken in half. It was as if he was trying to fix something that couldn't be saved, which couldn't help but make me laugh. There was only one piece left to complete the core, and that was what Art was looking for within himself. A small piece, then everything will be different. Then he might be able to do magic. And then there was a deafening explosion that shook the earth and blew almost the entire house into pieces. Alice dropped the glass of water in surprise and rushed to the ground, carried by the shockwave. Reynolds managed to catch his wife in time and immediately shielded her with his body. The flames from the explosion hit his back, tearing his clothes and burning his skin. The flames mixed with mana engulfed the silhouettes of the parents, preventing them from opening their eyes. But then everything went quiet, and all that remained from the explosion was a ringing in the ears and dust rising into the air. The man looked back, still holding his wife close and not understanding what had happened. Are you okay, dear? But Alice didn't care about her condition. She realized that her son had been in the house all this time. Art's still there, she screamed hysterically, trying to break through to the epicenter of the explosion. But Ray's strong arms did not allow her to move. Only now did he realize what his wife was saying and that the small child would most likely not survive. Gritting his teeth, he turned towards the burning house, determined to save his son, even if it was too late. The man rushed inside, disappearing into clouds of smoke and dust, making his way between the debris. Throwing aside fallen logs and interior items, he made his way to the destroyed room where Art should have been. Pushing aside another wall, he finally reached the place where the child should have been. His eyes widened in surprise when he finally saw what was hidden. The man froze, not believing his eyes. His legs gave way and he fell to his knees, not believing what he was seeing. Hysterical laughter escaped his lips, as if its owner did not believe at all that such a thing could happen. Reynolds, what's going on here? But Alice froze mid-sentence. Her eyes widened as well and her words caught in her throat. He's not even 3, but he already did it. Looking at his son floating in the air, surrounded by mana, Ray didn't understand. They looked at something incredible and still did not believe that Art was a genius who was able to awaken the mana core in 2 years. The glow faded and the boy sank to the ground, his bare feet softly touching the broken floor. He felt great, because finally what he was striving for had come true. This is what it's like to have a mana core, Art chuckled to himself, clenching his small fist. At that moment, even the trees seemed greener to him. And only a minute later he realized that the trees should not be visible because he was in the house. There is devastation all around. Broken walls, pieces of boards, and a column of dust. The house was reduced to a pile of stones and wood, causing the former king to suspect that the city had been attacked while he was in a trance. A year has passed, and a lot has happened besides the restoration of the house. Together with his mother, Art pretended that he was just learning to read and write. Studied magic, the basics of manipulation and mana management. Since the body was still small and weak, they studied the basics of body training with their father instead of sparring. In the mornings, they ran through the forest, training their endurance. We pumped up our abs, strengthening our core muscles and overall functionality. We did push-ups and other physical exercises to build muscle mass. Finally, Reynolds decided that Art was ready to practice with the wooden sword he had given him for his 3rd birthday. The boy was just reading a book when his father burst into the room. "Time for training," he announced. It seemed to the whole house, clutching a training weapon in his hand. A wind rose from the suddenly thrown open door, scattering sheets of paper around the room. The time for training came. The father turned out to be a strict but fair teacher. They decided to start with the basics. "Match the flow of mana with your breath," he commanded, raising the stick, which he apparently intended to use as a weapon. "Just like your heart or lungs, the nucleus is just another organ," Ray said, as if a child could understand such abstract concepts. The man crouched down to be level with his son, who stood in a fighting stance. His gaze focused on his partner's ridiculous weapon, a blow, but the branch did not give in, as if it imagined itself to be a sword. Again the knock of wood and again failure. Not even a crack appeared. The series of blows merged into one long roar, mixing with the wind cutting through the weapon. "Come on, I think you can do it," Ray encouraged, not perceiving his son as an opponent at all, but rather playing a game with him. "He won't let me rest until I do this," the boy realized, and decided to give it his all so as not to miss dinner. He closed his eyes, gathering mana around his body and drawing it inward, strengthening not only his body but also his weapons. As soon as I felt that everything had worked out, I was ready to attack. The father did not understand his son's change of mood and decided that he had simply gotten carried away. The boy swung, putting not only physical strength but also mana into the blow. There was a crack, and finally the stick that had been his father's improvised weapon broke in half, signaling victory. Ray did not expect such an outcome and did not have time to react, only looking after the fallen piece of branch. "Now I'm going to the office," Art said, catching his breath, and his father didn't object. It was approaching sunset. The sun was filling the boy's room with scarlet. He sat on the bed and meditated, going over in his head the knowledge he had acquired. Initially, the mana core is black due to the mixing of blood and other impurities with mana particles. Over time, the core becomes lighter in color as impurities are filtered out. The stages go as follows, from black to red. The core brightens, becoming first orange, then yellow. It is purified, becoming silver, and its final form is white. Each stage is divided into 3 shades: dark, solid, and light. The lighter the mana core, the purer it is and the more energy it can accumulate. Alice's scream coming from the kitchen interrupted my thoughts. She was calling Arthur for dinner. He was a little annoyed at being knocked down, but he still got up and headed to the right room. Dinner was already waiting on the table, which the parents started without waiting for their son. The mother chewed her food a little sheepishly, trying not to draw attention to the boy's mood. The father did not hide his emotions and barely noticeably glanced at him and then at his wife, as if wanting to say something. The boy wielded the cutlery a little aggressively, lamenting the fact that he could not be left alone for at least a couple of hours. "Honey, I think it's time to find Art a real mentor," Ray said, pushing his empty plate away. "He's only 4, Reynolds," Mother countered, looking as if she was ready to fight to defend her opinion and at least not fail in front of her husband. She was afraid that the new teacher might be biased against a child his age or choose an inappropriate training session that would injure Art. And even the fact that he himself volunteered to study with his son could not change his decision regarding the teacher. When he offered himself as a teacher, he did not think that Arthur at 4 years old would be such a prodigy in mana manipulation. "I can't train him. I can only hold back his potential," Reynolds countered, enveloping his body and thoughts in mental armor. Their conversation increasingly resembled a battle, although it did not look like that outwardly. But the imagination painted colorful pictures of their duel. The father insisted on sending the child to another city to study with his friend, but the mother was afraid to let him go so far, hundreds of miles. The boy sighed, realizing that his opinion was not going to be taken into account in this situation, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to eat. The argument continued. The appetite was disappearing faster and faster, But the end was approaching. A loud bang made the boy jump and turn his attention to his parents. They jumped up from their seats and stared at Art, waiting for his decision. "Arthur, it's up to you whether you want to go to the city and have a real teacher," Ray asked, to which the boy only sighed heavily. They are seriously giving the right of choice to a 4-year-old. Art swallowed the rest of his food and wondered whether he should accept his father's offer or listen to his mother. "We can go together and meet the teacher," the boy suggested, not taking sides but expressing his opinion. It seemed that both parents were happy with this option, although they were a little confused. Art didn't understand the hesitation and thought that he had said something wrong, which is why such a strange atmosphere arose. A quiet chuckle eased the tension and it became easier to breathe. It seems that the parents really didn't think about going together. "It would really make things easier for me if I were there when Art met his teacher." The mother breathed a sigh of relief, accepting her son's idea. "Then it looks like we're all going to Xyrus City," Ray concluded, slamming the table so hard that the plate of food he'd been holding flew into the air. The boy was shocked at how quickly his parents decided everything and were already preparing for a 3-week trip. And now he's lying on the bed and reading a book, looking for the fragment with the information he needs. "It seems like it should be here somewhere," the little boy thought, running his eyes over the lines. He didn't even notice that his mother entered the room with the intention of putting him to bed. "It's time to sleep. We're leaving early tomorrow," Alice scolded her son, taking the book from his hands. Although she hated to rush, everything had already been decided and prepared. "We're going to Xyrus with Dad's friends from the Twin Horns. They used to do Adventurers Guild quests together," Mom explained, covering her son with a blanket. "A goodnight kiss that has become a tradition before going to bed. If I don't catch you reading in the middle of the night, you can take a few books with you, so go to bed." The mother went out, wishing him good night, leaving her son alone with his thoughts. He remembered what he knew about the Twin Horns, as they had helped rebuild their ruined home and that they had once worked somewhere in the area. This team consisted of 2 mages and 3 amplifiers, so that they would help with any difficulties the family might encounter on the long trip, so that they could leave this small town with a clear conscience and see the rest of the world. Early in the morning, when it was just dawn, Art and his parents were already walking along the road towards the forest, where they were supposed to meet their friends and continue their journey together. And then someone's figures loomed on the horizon, and the travelers hurried towards them. "Thanks again for taking us along on the trip," Ray thanked the red-haired man. "Guys, meet my son." The father released his friend from his embrace and turned his attention to Arthur. The boy didn't expect that all eyes would be on him, so he even forgot his name, but he quickly got ready. "Hello, my name is Arthur Levin. Thank you for coming with us to Xyrus." He bowed politely. "What manners?" the same warrior praised the child. His scarlet hair glinted in the sun, turning red. The spear sticking out from behind his back clearly indicated what kind of weapon he wielded. Adam Crench sat in front of the child and stroked his head, marveling at how different his son was from his father. Someone's strong hands grabbed the baby and pulled him towards themselves. "He's so cute, he looks more like his mother." Angela Rose, a golden-haired mage, hugged Art tightly, not letting him breathe. He was embarrassed to be between women's breasts, but he couldn't say a word. "Angela, you're hurting him." And again, someone's huge hands lifted him off the ground by the scruff of his neck. The boy was horrified by who appeared before him. Durden Walker is an earthbender who looks more like a bear with a human face, but a kind and gentle soul. He put Art down on the ground, still smiling warmly. He shook his clothes, as if the baby might get dirty while being held in someone's arms. "No, it's not a bear, it looks more like a big and kind dog." The boy turned his gaze to the girl who was standing nearby, and silently watching what was happening. Jasmine Flamesworth, the dagger wielder, sat on the fence and looked down on everyone. She simply nodded in greeting and easily jumped down. It seemed like she wanted to say hello or something, but the girl only hurried away. "Don't pay attention, she just needs to get used to you." Art didn't notice another person approaching. The archer girl extended her hand to him in greeting. "Nice to meet you. My name is Helen Shard," she introduced herself, bending slightly to make it more comfortable. "Well, now we've all met," Ray said, and turned to the luggage. The men quickly loaded their things and sat down in their places. Alice was still a little worried. The bad feeling didn't go away, but she didn't want to cause panic. Everyone got into the carts ready to set off. "Let's go," Adam commanded and tugged on the reins, sending the dragon lizards into a gallop. The boy watched the city recede, anticipating an exciting journey. It seemed to him that now real life would begin, filled with adventures, and the starting point was this trip. Night was approaching, the sunset was blazing in the sky, and the carts continued their movement towards their intended destination. At some point, the travelers were attacked by wolves, but the team had no trouble dealing with them. They fought as a well-coordinated team and no one was hurt. Having stopped for the night, they lit a fire and sat down to cook the meat of the killed animals. It seemed that such a peaceful atmosphere could not help but make everyone happy. But Arthur was sad. Or rather, he was simply bored. "You look tired," Helen remarked, sitting down next to the boy. "Don't worry, this is your first trip," she chuckled as the boy nodded several times, confirming her guess. She asked him about magic and how and when he awakened. They started talking, and things became a little more fun. Adam got bored of just sitting and asked, "I need to stretch before bed. Do you mind if I play with your son a little? Let's spar?" The boy overheard the conversation and realized that he had no desire to help him stretch. "It's okay, but be careful. Our training has only moved slightly from light strength and mana exercises," Reynolds warned, agreeing with his friend's idea. And again, no one cared about Arthur's opinion. They simply roughly picked him up by the scruff of the neck and carried him off somewhere. Normal children his age can barely climb up the stairs, let alone fight with an adult professional warrior. In this company, no one seemed to even think that fighting with a child was something unusual. So the boys simply accepted his fate and got into a fighting stance. Adam threw a long stick, which served as a spear, over his shoulder and asked if his opponent was ready. The boy had nowhere to go. He warmed up and prepared for the attack. The spearman pulled his weapon aside and asked, "Do you know how to strengthen your weapon, boy genius?" The warrior seemed to be in a serious mood, and in his fighting stance he resembled a ferocious predator. A smile touched his lips in anticipation of an interesting battle. The boy looked back at the silent spectators, seeking support. "I tried to give my father a mental signal that he was about to be beaten, so that he would get him out of this mess." Ray misunderstood his expression and continued to encourage him, expecting a battle. Now there was definitely no way out. I would have to fight. Art closed his eyes, gathering mana into his sword for power. Disperse the particles throughout the body, increasing physical strength and endurance. He was a king who had fought many battles. How could he lose now? The stand is like a hello from the past. Everything is old. Everything is as always. He gripped the sword tighter, spreading his hands along the hilt for comfort. The mana core began to pulse, signaling that the body was ready for battle. A jerk, the boy breaks away from the spot. The enemy is in front of him. He just needs to remember all the lessons and battles of the past and attack. Adam assessed his opponent's determination and smiled. Getting into a fighting stance, he prepared to parry. Art was rapidly approaching the enemy, preparing to attack and, if necessary, defend himself. Now the spearman also needed to concentrate and become a little more serious. Easily blocking the inept attack, he stepped to the side. The sword slid along the shaft, changing its trajectory. Without much effort, Adam was able to knock the wooden sword away and prepared to attack again. He didn't expect the boy to be behind him, ready to repeat the blow. The warrior's instinct was not asleep. His sixth sense screamed about danger. And everything would have been fine if the child's body hadn't failed him. The boy stumbled and lost his balance. Although it took a moment to collect himself, the chance was lost. The warrior turned around, assessing the enemy's position and calculating the risks and opportunities. He seems to expect nothing from the child, but in vain. Art gathered mana on the tip of the blade, strengthening the weapon. A swing. Just a second to attack, so little time to think. But Adam managed to parry, taking advantage of the pause, and attacked in response. The spear flew over Arthur's head, who managed to duck. A focused gaze, ready to continue and fight back, was directed at the enemy. In vain did the spearman underestimate the child. He flew with his whole body into the enemy's side, knocking him off his feet. A new attack, the boy flies into the sky like a bird, adding gravity to his strength. Adam swung his leg, preparing to kick. But Art dodged in time, jumped back, and immediately got into a stance. Yet his speed was not up to par with a professional. Adam was already nearby, raising his improvised spear to strike. He spun the stick, adding to the momentum, and delivered a precise blow to the enemy's wooden sword. Newton's third law came to mind. For every action there is an equal force, opposite in direction. The boy flew back, unable to stay on his feet and dropping the sword from his hands. The landing could not be called soft. Art's back hit the ground noticeably. "Art!" Alice cried out, realizing that this idea was bad and dangerous from the start. Adam was able to use physics as needed, increasing his strength many times over. Arthur was still trying to recover from the loss, trying not to lose face. Durden gave Adam a resounding slap on the back of the head, reminding him that he was still a child in front of him, and not a battle-hardened warrior like him. The spearman scolded Reynolds, sincerely not understanding what kind of training he had done to be able to raise a small monster in the body of a child. But Ray himself was no less shocked, saying that he definitely hadn't taught him that. Alice didn't listen to anyone, treated her son, lamenting the fact that such training was dangerous for the child's life and health. "I learned it from watching my dad and reading some books," Art lied, to avoid revealing himself further. Of course, they didn't believe him, but nevertheless they asked him to teach them several of the techniques he had shown, and they were unanimous in this. The boy agreed, although he was a little embarrassed by this reaction. It seemed like everyone was impressed by the battle. Only Adam could not come to his senses. Although he did not lose, he could not come to terms with the fact that a 4-year-old child fought with him on equal terms. A crack was heard behind him. The spearman decided to test the strength of the tree with his own head. It seems that the tree lost, unable to withstand such abuse. Several days have passed since the company began its journey to the city of Xyrus. The travelers found a small lagoon with a waterfall and decided to stop there to wash and rest. During this time, Arthur's birthday passed, for which Jasmine gave him one of her knives. Although she was embarrassed, she still handed over the present, finally getting used to the new team member. Everyone was frolicking like children, playing in the water, jumping off the cliff and diving. Adam, Helen, and Reynolds continued to train Arthur and made decent progress. After so much training, it's time to relax and have fun, to feel like a child. Ray, just for fun, pushed Durden right onto Adam, who was swimming below. A wave rose up, completely covering Jasmine and Angela and washing the spearman to the shore of the lake. Art was amazed at how quickly Jasmine learned several of his techniques. He understood his instructions so quickly, especially when learning the feint step. The boy's thoughts were interrupted by laughter behind him. It was his father running somewhere with a basket of someone else's clothes. But now the time for rest has come to an end, and it is time to continue on our way. The company returned to the carts, preparing to leave. "Hurry up, Art, we're leaving!" Mom shouted, wiping her head with an already damp towel. "Right now, Mom." He moved toward the cart and jumped into it easily. They still had 2 weeks of travel ahead of them, so they didn't want to delay. The landscapes changed one after another, and now they entered the territory at the foot of the mountain range. The dragon lizards clicked their claws loudly on the stone, breaking the silence. The carriage slowed down and Adam caught up with it, attracting the attention of the passengers. "You know, Art, I still remember how your father used to get us into all sorts of trouble," he chuckled, immersed in memories. "I'm sure it wasn't just the ray that was causing trouble back then. Wasn't there a time when you accidentally—" But Helen, hanging from the roof of the carriage, never finished the sentence, leaving the story untold. But the hint was taken. Adam and the archer continued to argue, so Arthur turned his gaze to his mother. He had noticed long ago that something was wrong with her, but she kept silent and said that everything was fine. "Like, I was just a little tired from the road, that's all." The boy patted her on the shoulder and returned to reading his book. After flipping through several pages, I stopped at the one I had finished with last time. Immersed in his reading, he didn't immediately notice that someone was staring at him. Trying to ignore it, he continued reading, but he became confused and could not concentrate. "It seems that we will have to pay attention to the one who clearly wants to say something." Art turned to the slit in the cart, behind which 2 ruby eyes glittered. Jasmine's gaze seemed to say, "I demand knowledge, teach me something new." And suddenly Arthur felt some kind of uneasiness and stopped. He looked up from his book, looking around the space, but everything was quiet. His premonition had failed him? The cart began to shake suddenly, causing the boy to almost drop the book, not expecting such a turn of events. Something was happening and everyone realized it, but only Helen saw the reason. "Bandits!" she cried out and commanded to attack, being the first to react to the threat. "Submit, O wind! Follow my will! Gather and protect!" Angela recited the spell, gathering a tight lump of air in front of her like a shield. The mother immediately rushed to her son, covering him with her body in an attempt to protect him. Arrows flew towards them, filling the air with a mocking whistle. The wind magic mixed with the shockwave from Jasmine's swift movements, who arrived in time to help. For the first time, Art was in the role of the one being protected, and not the other way around. So he watched the battle from the sidelines in amazement. The warrior landed in front of the cart, angry at the sudden attack. Ray grabbed one of the arrows with his bare hands, breaking it in half. Durden raised his staff, ready to protect everyone with earth magic. Adam extended his spear and pointed it at the still invisible enemy. Helen limped and joined them, pulling the arrow out of her leg as she did so. She took the worst of it, but the armor was able to protect her leading arm, so she was able to fight. She needed to get closer to her fellow travelers to be able to provide supporting fire. She easily jumped off the ledge, taking a more comfortable position. The bowstring creaked and the archer took aim, searching for a target. Arthur was still clinging to his mother, realizing that they had somehow been surrounded without being noticed. Archers stood on the rocks on all sides, ready to attack at any moment. Who are they, and how were they able to lure travelers into a trap without them noticing? Other bandits, who had remained unnoticed until then, also rose from the grass. Someone's massive axe glinted in the sun, attracting Arthur's attention. A skin on the shoulders, a necklace of fangs on the neck, and a long scar on the chest of even a seemingly strong person. He slammed the weapon into the ground with a bang, delighted at his excellent catch. An evil smile touched the leader's lips, and it sent shivers down the child's spine. "Leave the women and the child alive and try not to leave scars," the dark man commanded, assessing the spoils with his eyes. "They are clearly planning to sell them on the black market as slaves since they don't want to spoil the product." The bandit leader looked at them as a way to make money rather than as people, and this angered the former king. He had managed to forget that in every world there is dirt like him. A vile person with a rotten soul. Anger turned out to be stronger than common sense and covered Arthur completely. He took hold of the gifted blade and was about to attack, but his mother reacted in time. She jerked, feeling her son's rage behind her back, and hurried to hug him. Frightened and trembling, she thought only about how to protect her child from danger. "Don't worry, I'm here," she said, stroking Art's head in an attempt to calm him down or calm herself down. The rage subsided and was replaced by maternal warmth. He realized that the best thing he could do in this situation was to be there for his mother. The archers fired their arrows again, making it clear to everyone that they were not in the mood for negotiations. "Gather and guard," Durden commanded, and he and Ray rushed to the wagons. A wave of the staff, a spell, and the earth trembled, rising higher. A stone wall shielded the team from the hail of arrows, as if its tentacles were creeping ever higher. The shells whistled as they hit the cobblestones, but a few still managed to penetrate. And they would have ended up in Arda if Angela hadn't arrived in time. With a wave of her wand, she created a small whirlwind that changed the trajectory of the arrows. The battle was gaining momentum. The leader joined the supporters, raising his axe to attack. Helen fired several arrows at him, preventing him from moving further. The bandit's weapon easily cut through them, although it did slow his movement a little. Durden fought one of the swordsmen, giving Ray the opportunity to rush to his family. He jumped off the cliff right onto one of the archers, taking him out of the game. His impact caused cracks to form on the ground, scattering rock fragments and clumps of dirt. He was furious that his wife and son might get hurt. He ran between the bandits at great speed, knocking them out one after another. In the heat of battle, he did not notice that one of the enemies had approached him from behind and was already raising his sword to strike. Help arrived in time, the arrow hit the target, ending one life and saving another. Nodding his thanks to the girl, Reynolds returned to the battle. The archer accepted the thanks, drawing her bowstring again. The bandits moved closer and closer to the carts, pushing the warriors closer, squeezing them into a ring. Jasmine wielded 2 daggers, cutting up the bandits like animals for slaughter, sparing no one. Adam kept up with them, trying not to lose sight of anyone. The warrior's instincts told him of danger, and the spearman moved to the side. And just in time, another second and he would have been cut in half. A jump, a step, and here he is, ready to attack. A few precise blows to vulnerable points and the enemy falls dead. There was no time to catch my breath. I had to go back into battle. Jasmine rushed between the bandits, cutting off heads one after another, like a wild cat, jumping onto the shoulders of her opponents. The enemies understood that they could not hide from her. They tried to run away, but did not even have time to move. The girl stopped abruptly, not immediately noticing that there was another bandit standing behind the defeated one. He had already spun the whip, preparing to launch its end at the enemy, but the girl dodged it in time. She jumped back, inadvertently exposing herself to the attack of the bandits' partners. Sliding along the ground backwards, she stopped, preparing for a new attack. "Stop resisting, baby. I'll make sure I teach you a good lesson so that in the end you'll beg me to stay with you," he cried, raising the whip again. She clearly didn't like being the object of ridicule, and the desire to tear him apart only grew. Several blows merged into one, mixing with torn grass and clods of earth. The girl's silhouette blurred, and the speed made it seem as if she had managed to multiply her body. But then she slows down, jumps to the side, catching her breath. There are small cuts all over her body, but the girl doesn't seem to notice them. She was at a disadvantage. Art knew it, but he couldn't help. What can he do with this weak child's body against an adult? A roar distracted me from my thoughts, and the cart rocked from the body that flew into it. Reynolds lay nearby, covered in dust and small wounds. Blood was dripping from his mouth and his vision was blurred from the blow. "Darling," Alice cried out and immediately rushed to her husband, examining him for injuries. Art looked around, feeling someone's gaze. The leader was standing nearby, as if enjoying their suffering. It was he who sent his father flying and watched their struggle with a victorious grin. "Mom, you have to cure Dad quickly," Arthur shouted, thinking of an escape route. I can't, Alice trembled, tears streaming down her cheeks, but she did nothing. I'm fine, dear. My wounds are not fatal, her husband encouraged her, forcing a weak semblance of a smile. She would do her best. The boy knew that, but he was still worried. Art, listen carefully. After your mother uses the healing spell, those bad people will go after her. I will be able to fight off the leader, but I will have no time to worry about protecting you, Ray began. Take your mother along the path we came from and don't stop. The boy tried to object, tried to say that he could fight too, but his father was adamant. He just smiled, appreciating his son's courage. Approaching the boy, he patted him on the head in a fatherly way. Listen to me, Arthur Levin. I know that you can fight. That's why I trust you with my mother. Protect her. He smiled at the corners of his lips. Protect the child inside her, Ray added, and the boy understood. He could have guessed earlier by the way her father became more protective of her, by the way she felt ill in the carriage. His mother was pregnant. That was the reason for everything, and it was obvious. But for some reason, Art didn't guess. They were going to tell about it in Xyrus, but circumstances turned out differently. Now Art has 2 lives in his hands, and he will not ruin them. I will protect my mother, the boy promised, his gaze filled with determination. He stood in front of them, not letting them get any closer while Alice cast the spell. They have 4 mages on their side. They need to prepare for anything. The leader of the bandits saw what was happening behind the child and immediately became furious. They have a healer. Don't let her get away, he ordered, pointing his finger at Art's mother. It's time. The boy grabbed his mother by the hand and pulled her in the opposite direction from danger. He hoped that everyone would stay alive, even if they were badly injured. Adam was already waiting for them on the way, showing them the way away from the slaughter. Just a second to think, danger crept up unnoticed from behind. One of the bandits was running towards them. Art wouldn't have had time to react. A moment to rush forward and protect. I'll hold him off. Run away from here, Adam cried out, parrying the attack in time. Art, without wasting any more time, ran on, dragging his mother along with him. Something flashed. One of the archers pointed his weapon at them. Art's instincts did not fail him. He sensed his thirst for blood from a distance. I tried to find its source and noticed an arrow fired at them. There was no time to think. We had to act quickly. Drawing his sword, he tried to stop the flying projectile, but the magic on the tip of the arrow pierced it. The sword shattered into pieces with a crash. The boy still managed to dodge, although he dropped the broken weapon. The bandit couldn't believe his eyes. How could some kid do something like that? With a precise hit, Helen took it down, eliminating the threat. Don't stop, Arthur, she shouted, drawing the bowstring back. Art nodded in gratitude and ran on, looking around more carefully. Something was wrong. There must have been 4 mages. Here's one, fighting with Jasmine and Angela. The second is confronted by Adam at the foot. The third one, the leader, is held by Helen and Ray. The fourth is nowhere to be seen. Perhaps he is still hiding? The leader gave the command somewhere up there that the plan was changing and everyone needed to be killed. And only now did Arthur turn towards the mountain. There, mana gathered, forming a huge sphere of water, aimed straight at them. Now they're really in trouble. It's almost impossible to get away. The whirlpool spell was ready. One swing, and it was already flying towards Art and Alice. There is nowhere to hide. You need to have time to dodge. The water ball rushed downwards at a furious speed, as if increasing in size and slightly blurring from air resistance. Even if he uses mana, Arthur will be able to dodge, but his mother won't have time, and she's more important now. The plan was born a second before the collision. The boy stopped, leaving uneven furrows in the ground. Sorry, Mom. A lonely thought flashed through his head as he pushed her hard to the side, out of harm's way. The woman didn't have time to react and simply flew backwards, unable to control her fall. The kid knew that he might not succeed, but he wanted to destroy the source of danger, to kill the magician. Filling the dagger with mana, he threw it straight into the center of the spell, piercing through it. The body was enveloped in cold water, and the blade rushed forward, not feeling any obstacle. It worked. It stuck into the magician's leg, and a thread woven from mana wrapped around his thigh, preventing him from freeing himself. Art pulled the thread, dragging the mage down with him, hoping that the mana string wouldn't break. Mother ran to help him but did not have time to do anything. Arthur clutched the thread tightly in his hand, not wanting to die alone. He wanted to drag the bandit with him, but he, having grabbed the edge of the ledge, continued to hang, holding not only his own weight but also the weight of the child. Fingers slid over the cold stone. The outcome was predetermined. The edge of the cliff crumbled, leaving nothing to hold on to. They fell together from several dozen meters, realizing that they would not survive. Durden arrived in time to see what was happening nearby. He swung his staff, creating a huge hand from the ground. He tried to grab the falling boy but didn't have time. They disappeared into the fog together. Art looked up, tears welling up in his eyes because it was so nice to know that they wanted to save him. As he fell to his death, all he could think about was that he had always dreamed of becoming an older brother. But that dream was never meant to come true. Memories from a past life came flooding back, as if reminding him of the life Art had once lived. A painfully familiar room, and he is alone in it. No one dared to disturb the king's peace. Perhaps that is why he is so lonely now. There was an unexpected knock at the door, and a maid stood on the threshold with dinner, but he walked around her and moved on. "Good morning, King Gray." That was his name once. The man walked past as if he hadn't noticed anyone or had ignored them. He was always accompanied at a distance, but still loneliness did not leave the king's heart for a minute. He entered one of the huge whitish doors and stopped in front of a table at which an elderly man sat. "King Gray?" The gray-haired man was surprised, rising from his seat. There was no answer. The monarch looked at the painting that hung on the wall in a row with others. It depicted the council that actually governed the country, its politics and economy. The neighboring painting was signed with his name and depicted Gray himself. In a world full of problems such as declining birth rates and limited resources, wars were replaced by duels and armies of kings, and he was one of them. While being on the council is beneficial, I won't lie that I envy the glory and fame you kings get after victories. The older man stepped out from behind the table and moved closer to Gray. His visit came as a surprise to the council member, and not exactly a pleasant one. The king pulled a gold medallion from behind his collar, attracting the elder's attention. Having flashed in the sun, it fell with a crash onto the table, thrown by the heated man. The old man shuddered, but did not show that he was scared. He simply did not understand what it meant. "I quit, Marlin." Gray explained his actions and, without saying another word, walked out. He spent his whole life trying to be the strongest, but what's the point? He was an orphan. Everyone he cared about was gone, so for what, fame or money? Now he would give up everything he had for the chance to return to Ashbur and see his family and friends again. Consciousness began to clear. The setting sun was seeping through my eyelids. The boy did not understand where he was, in the present or the past. He was still alive. His body screamed at him, but his mind resisted. Barely opening his leaden eyelids, he saw belongings scattered on the ground. He had nothing with him except a dagger, so these were not his things. When his vision became clearer, the boy saw the mutilated corpse of the magician next to him, whom he still managed to drag along with him. Nausea rose in his throat and he immediately turned away. Not the most pleasant sight, especially for children's eyes. The birds, frightened by the scream, flew away to the sides, flying away from the possible danger. R2 didn't feel any better even after emptying his stomach. His eyes rolled back and his consciousness began to drift away again. He thought he would close his eyes for just a minute, just to rest. A leaf, blown off a nearby tree by a gust of wind, landed on his face. "It's making it hard to breathe. I need to throw it off. I had to fall right on my nose." The boy shook his head, regaining consciousness a little but immediately experiencing a side effect: nausea. His stomach was growling. He was thirsty. How long had he been lying here? Art tried to get up, but it didn't work. His arms and legs wouldn't obey. They were shaking, and the slightest movement caused a dull pain. Then he decided to at least crawl to the berries scattered nearby. He grabbed one with his fingertips and immediately sent it into his mouth. Some kind of food, but still. It will go now. It is better for many than to die of hunger. Tears of weakness and helplessness welled up in his eyes, but he still washed down the berry with water and leaned back on the grass. Looking at the sunset sky, he thought that he should get up, find his parents, check if everything was okay with them. "Thank you for the treat." He thanked someone unknown and lost consciousness again. A couple of hours passed. Night gave way to morning, and then to day, as evidenced by the singing of birds. The boy opened his still heavy eyelids, trying to make out the place he was in. He tried to sit up and almost succeeded, but his body was still weak and aching from the wounds he had received, which made themselves felt with every movement. Art fell back onto the grass, unable to cope with gravity and the weakness that still enveloped his body. A heavy sigh escaped from his mouth on its own, or perhaps from a sharp collision with the ground, although not as large-scale as recently. Closing his eyes, Art concentrated on the mana inside, which, due to the injuries, had turned into an uncontrollable flow and began to spread throughout his body. He collected it piece by piece from all over his body, trying to analyze his condition. Small particles seeped through the damaged flesh, and the core turned a grayish-black hue. He didn't see anything good, which meant he would have to cope on his own, so he overcame himself and stood up on trembling legs. Gritting his teeth, he concentrated on stopping his swaying. Finally, he was able to control himself and, almost without staggering, stood up, only once holding onto a nearby tree. A shudder ran through his body as his gaze slid back to the mangled corpse. The boy decided that he needed to collect things that could help him survive if help did not arrive soon. Having overcome the urge to vomit, the boy approached the magician's body and, after twisting it a bit, finally pulled his dagger out of his thigh. Art was so overwhelmed that he couldn't control himself and fell back onto the grass, leaving a trail of the vanquished man's blood on it. Now it was all over. He was still alive, but that was precisely what amazed him. The ledge from which he fell slid between the clouds about 30 meters from the place where the former king woke up, which could not help but surprise and prompt the only question: how did I survive this? Quite a bit of time has passed since then, but no one has looked for him. Apparently, having written him down as dead in advance, they are probably sitting there mourning. But there was no time to feel sorry for myself. I had to get out, find a way up, back to my family. He needed to move on, because somewhere out there his father was waiting. Somewhere out there his mother was shedding bitter tears. "You're awake!" A crackling voice creaked from somewhere in the depths of the forest, but as if from all sides at once. The boy immediately hid behind the nearest tree, clutching the dagger Jasmine had given him to his chest. He looked in the direction he came from, but found no one except the mage's corpse. The thought crept into his head that he was speaking, but that was impossible, because the dead do not speak, at least not to the living. "How are you feeling?" the voice continued, and Art only prayed that the bandit he had killed would not rise, otherwise he could not vouch for himself. He approached the object he suspected of feigning death, half bent, and held out a stick to check whether he was truly dead. "Don't worry. The corpse won't come back to life if that's what you're afraid of," the voice informed, and the boy finally let out a sigh of relief. At least some good news for the whole day. Only a minute later did he realize that someone was still talking to him, which meant Art was still in danger, and now was not the time to relax. "You are the one who saved me. Show yourself," the boy cried out, pointing the dagger somewhere into the void. A small animal jumped out of the bush in fright and ran away, deciding that someone wanted to bite it, which made the little one even feel a little ashamed. "This is your second question, and as for the first, you will find out as soon as you arrive at my home," the voice continued, and it became clear that it was not coming from somewhere outside, but was echoing right inside the head. Arthur decided that he would try to find the one who was talking to him, because his speech sounded confident, albeit a little scary. The owner of the voice was the only one who could return the child to his parents. At least that's what he said himself, reminding Art of his current goal. Somewhere out there, his father, mother, and the boys from the Twin Horns are still waiting for him. Relatives, friends. The boy were worried about their condition. Were they all alive? Did they get to Xyrus? He realized that he couldn't cope alone, and the only thing he could do now was to trust this unknown voice. Having weighed all the pros and cons, the boy coughed into his fist and still agreed to this adventure. "Mr. Voice," he said sheepishly, "may I disturb you to honor me with your presence?" A terrible roar swept over the forest, vaguely reminiscent of the laughter of something huge with small growling notes. He was amused by the address and the fact that she, a lady, was addressed as Sir. And yet she understood the feelings of a child who had fallen into a trap, so she was not angry. Arthur was amazed by the fact that the unknown entity that for some reason saved him not only turned out to be a woman, but also knew his first and last name. "I'll show you something," she grinned, and the boy's body was enveloped in a scarlet light, which made his eyes darken. Images began to flash through his head, mixing into a continuous stream, from which Art staggered and was forced to lower himself to the ground so as not to fall. He tried to reach for the dagger, thinking that he was being attacked and needed to defend himself, but it disappeared from sight, and the landscape of the clearing where he was replaced by another. A bird's-eye view of the forest, with a barely noticeable stone elevation sticking out among the dense crowns. She shows the way to her abode. It is somewhere in the forest, in a cave under the mountain. "I recommend that you go right now. While it's still light, it will be much safer." The images stopped changing one after another, and the boy finally came to his senses. As he moved deeper into the forest, and as his body's condition improved, leaving only the unpleasant heaviness of a couple of injuries, Art wondered what kind of magic the lady had used to save him. How did she know he was there, that he was falling? And why did she save only him? The more he tried to find a solution, the more questions arose, but a distant noise distracted his thoughts. "Please let it be what I think it is," Art said as he crawled over the huge boulders. Finally, he found himself at the top, where a view of a small lake opened up between the rocks. Water. Without thinking for a second, the baby immediately rushed to swim, throwing off his dirty and sometimes torn clothes wherever he could along the way. The spray scattered in all directions, leaving dark spots on the dry stones. Now he could wash himself, drink his fill, and then wash his clothes so as not to walk around like the victim of an attack, which is what he was. "How sweet and carefree," laughed the same voice, reminding us that there was some observer watching everything from behind the scenes. "Don't worry, there's nothing to see there," the lady reassured when the boy sheepishly covered himself with a piece of shirt, but only made things worse. "These are just words. The king must remain calm and composed," Arthur muttered under his breath, pulling his still damp clothes back on. He reassured himself that his body was a child's, still undeveloped, so there was nothing to look at, and he shouldn't take her words to heart. Having decided to make a short stop, the boy collected some water in a wineskin and, having eaten a couple of berries to satisfy his hunger, began to think. Not far from where he needs to go is the area of the elves. Whether this is good or bad is not clear. Only the fog that should surround the kingdom is not visible. The sun was heading towards the horizon, painting the sky gold. A dangerous time was beginning. The boy continued on his way, guided by an unknown voice. Fears of traveling through the animal glade were suppressed by the fact that, as it turned out, only small animals were present here. What was surprising was that there were no beasts with mana, because this place was filled to the brim with mana. It was just a pity that there was no time to absorb it. I had to hurry. He needed to return to his parents, to his pregnant mother, because the fear of his potential death could endanger the child inside her. He hoped that they were all alive and that they would wait for him, even if it took a long time. "I'm glad you were able to get here safe and sound," as the desired cave, shrouded in bluish fireflies, finally appeared from behind another bush. "It's nice to meet you," the boy said sheepishly, looking at the stone blocks and, a little hesitantly, pulled one of the roots towards himself, imitating something vaguely resembling a handshake. "As interesting as it may be, I'm not a sentient cluster of rocks. Come inside. I'm in a crevice." It became doubly awkward, so, trying to ignore what had happened, Arthur stepped inside. There were more fireflies with mana inside the rock, which is why the space was not dark. Overcoming the fear that washed over him, he continued to follow them. He was driven by the desire to meet his parents as soon as possible, but he also wanted to find out who saved him. The cave twisted and turned, sometimes descending, sometimes rising higher, bending as if avoiding invisible obstacles and straightening out again, narrowing to the point of impossibility, and again turning into entire grottos. "Watch your step," the lady warned. But it was too late. Art slipped on one of the stones and, losing his balance, began to fall. Everything would have been fine if the cave hadn't suddenly deepened, and he hadn't flown towards the distant unknown, shrouded in dense clouds of mana. It turned out that the light was emitted by huge berries, more like lamps, but there was no time to examine them. The boy realized with horror that he had been flying for several seconds already, which meant that the fall would not be particularly pleasant, to put it mildly. Finally, the bottom appeared, but it didn't cause joy, only panic. The child's body collided with the stone with a loud crash, but did not receive any particular damage, which was surprising, but could not help but please. A warning that I could fall from a height of several stories would have been nice, he thought, rubbing his bruised cheek. After shaking off his clothes and checking his body parts for injuries, he finally straightened up. The gaze slid along the stone walls, caught on the multicolored particles of mana flying around, and finally stopped on an object that differed from the surrounding environment. Confusion and fear enveloped the mind and paralyzed the body. His legs gave way, and the boy, who was about to take a step back, fell to the ground, keeping a close eye on the person sitting nearby. Thoughts about the fact that he had come here in vain and what he could do now prevented him from analyzing the situation sensibly. He was amazed at what appeared before him, even though it was somewhat obvious. On a makeshift stone throne sat a huge black knight with slits for eyes from which a scarlet light poured. Art was right in front of him, so tiny. Even though a child, even an adult, would not compare to this 4-meter-tall creature. "Finally we meet, child." The knight's voice changed a little, but was still recognizable. Art did not even doubt that it was he who spoke to him, and that he was the one who saved him. The black figure stood up from its place and moved closer. His long, demonic horns creaked as they clung to the cave's ceiling, leaving furrows and sparks. The footsteps echoed around, causing the entire floor to shake and small stones to bounce in place. The closer the figure got, the wider his mouth and eyes opened in surprise, and the more he had to tilt his head back to continue maintaining eye contact. "Bugs will fly into your mouth if you keep it open so wide," the statue said, either out of resentment or to smooth things over, holding out a clawed hand to the boy. He wanted to back away, run away, or at least crawl away, but his body was paralyzed with fear. Art had already regretted several times that he had decided to believe that voice and come here. What would happen to him now? Finally, the demonic knight realized that he was greatly frightening the guest and retreated. She froze at arm's length, thinking about what she could do in this situation to calm the child and show that she would not harm him. "It will take me a while to open a spatial rift strong enough to get you home." The lady extended her hand to Art, helping him up. "There are plants here that can feed us until then." She pointed to the same glowing berries that the boy had noticed during the flight. He thanked her. It was unclear for what, for helping now or for not killing him a couple of minutes ago. Attention turned to the glowing fruits, which amazed with their variety of shapes and shades. They looked quite normal, and if they were offering it, it was worth trying. One of the berries not only glittered, filled with mana, but also reflected the boy's face, emaciated, covered in abrasions, with sad, lost eyes. Not long ago, he was eating fruit with his parents, fooling around with them, and now he is standing in some cave far from his family. There is no point in thinking about it. He will return soon. Sadness will not help bring this moment closer. A scarlet mouth with huge sharp teeth protruded from behind his shoulder, reminding Art that he was not alone here. "This one tastes better." The knight pointed to the orange fruit, kneeling nearby to be less intimidating. Jumping up on the spot, Arthur crushed the berry he was holding in his hands in fright, but still turned around and thanked for the hint. The glowing fruits tasted sweet and very pleasant. Plus they restored mana, which was even better and more necessary. Arthur and the knight decided to dine together, keeping quiet. Chewing each piece carefully, the boy decided it was time to ask what he wanted so much. He rubbed his temple, thinking about how to start a conversation. "I know you told me you were a lady, but is there a better way I can address you?" The child began and received an immediate response. His savior's name was Sylvia. "Sylvia, do you mind if I ask a few questions?" The knight nodded, but did not promise to give all the answers, since there might be something she simply didn't know. The fear slowly faded. Arthur began to ask Sylvia the questions that had been tormenting him since the fall. Where was this place? Why was she here alone? Where was she from? How did she get hurt and why did she save him? This place was a narrow area lying between the animal glades and the forest of Eleanor, and no one knew about it because Sylvia protected it from all who approached. Although such cases were quite rare, Arthur was the first to enter Sylvia's lands and her cave. "Call me Art, that's what my family called me for short." Memories came flooding back. But the boy didn't get distracted, thinking that he would meet them soon. "Okay, then I will call you the same. As for your second question, I am here alone only because I have no one else to be with." It was surprising to hear sadness in the voice of such a huge and frightening creature, but Art understood it, because he felt the same thing now. Sylvia had many enemies who wanted what she had. The knight fell silent, looking somewhere into the darkness of the cave. Art was in no hurry to interrupt her, waiting for the moment when she would continue herself. "In the last battle with the enemies before I was able to escape, I was inflicted with this wound." She rubbed the scarlet stroke on her armor, as if remembering the battle and how she had shamefully fled. "As for why I saved you," she began, rising from her seat and turning sideways to Art. "Perhaps I was touched by your courage and self-sacrifice. Perhaps Sylvia saw herself reflected in Arthur's actions, but who knows? Maybe she just felt lonely. She herself did not understand what prompted her to save a little falling boy. My apologies, Art, but it's already night. My wound is festering. I need to be in good condition when I work on the spatial rift tomorrow." The knight walked back to the throne, ending the conversation. Arthur thanked her again and, wishing her good night, settled down on one of the stones. As the lone, fearsome figure dressed in armor walked away, he couldn't help but think how lonely she looked. "I almost forgot," Sylvia interrupted the boy's thoughts as he was already falling asleep. "My vision can't reach where they're headed." A guilty note crept into his voice, but she still assured him that the boy's parents and friends were safe, in case he was unsure. They were safe, that was all they could think about now. What a relief, they are all okay. He wanted to hear these words so much, but he was so afraid. A single tear slid down his cheek, immediately hiding under his chin, leaving no hint of sadness. He was so happy to hear this, so glad that no one was hurt except him. Now he could relax a little and continue to do everything to get home as soon as possible. The next day was not much different from the previous ones. Art did not stop training even in such a situation, and Sylvia watched with a smile as he waved a branch in the air. She helped him pick high-hanging fruit. She told and showed how she would create a rift to transfer him to his relatives. They could talk for hours about different things when Sylvia wasn't preparing the portal. Hours turned into days, and days into weeks, time flowing unnoticed as they spent every moment in each other's company. And although Sylvia did not talk about her life, Art gradually began to understand what kind of personality this mysterious creature was. And so, a new day, Arthur sat meditating on one of the stones and thought about Sylvia. What it seemed like at first glance, and what it revealed over time. Sylvia was the living embodiment of the phrase, "Don't judge a book by its cover." Despite her appearance, she turned out to be very kind, gentle, patient, and warm. She knew how to empathize, support in difficult times, find the right words to console or guide on the right path. Art, it's time to have a snack. These fruits are especially piquant and rarely grow in other places, Sylvia said, noticing the attention from the side, holding out a branch with berries. In her hands they seemed tiny, but as soon as Arthur took them, they became more like a watermelon. Sylvia reminded the boy of his mother in that she too was gentle and kind, but also scolded him harshly when he made mistakes. And then Art remembered something unpleasant about their similarity. There was a time when he clearly expressed his dislike for the bandits who attacked him, his friends and parents. He believed that they deserved a death worse than murder if any of them survived. He intended to hunt them down someday and kill them with his own hands in the most horrible and painful way. A gust of wind knocked him out of his thoughts. For some reason, Sylvia's fist was hovering right in front of the boy's face. It seemed like just a flick on the forehead, but Art flew back a couple of meters. His vision was double. His head was buzzing, and he couldn't understand what had just happened and what had prompted the knight to hit him. The landing, like the impact, could not be called soft. "What was that?" he exclaimed, sincerely not understanding the reason for such a sharp change in the knight's mood. "Art, perhaps you are not wrong that those bandits deserve to die. I decided not to save the life of the mage you fell with for the same reason," she began, trying to explain her actions. "However, allowing your heart to be darkened by hatred and revenge will only harm you." She was right. You can't do that. You can't wish death on anyone, much less have a hand in it. Instead, you need to keep moving forward with your head held high, so that everyone around you will be jealous, including your enemies. There will still be many troubles along the way, but you cannot let grief and anger corrode your mind. You need to learn from the example of others and look to the future with a smile. This is the only way to win. "I hit you too hard, I'm sorry," Sylvia apologized, stroking the bruise with her fingertips. A lecture on morality and life from a figure who seemed to be the embodiment of evil could not help but strike Art, just as it could not help but be remembered. The boy was so deeply immersed in his memories that he did not immediately hear the knight calling him. She was worried that he still hadn't eaten the fruit she brought him, and she thought that she had done something wrong or that something had happened. But the child convinced her that everything was fine, and that he was just thinking. The boy was chewing a piece of fruit and casually looking at his new friend. And then he noticed something. "Sylvia, your wound is festering. It seems to be getting worse and worse." Thick blood flowed from the scarlet stroke, slightly glowing due to the abundance of mana. She just said that there was no need to worry. The wound would fester from time to time. There was nothing to worry about. Sylvia hastened to change the subject. "As far as I remember, humans usually awaken at the age of 12 or 13. So how did you form a core capable of using more effective techniques than many full-fledged mages?" Art couldn't help but be proud of himself and simply said that his parents once called him a genius because of this. "Then perhaps you can learn it." The boy did not understand what Sylvia was talking about, but the thirst for new knowledge made him become twice as attentive. The knight stood up and moved a little to the side so that she could see better. "Absorb mana while moving, and possibly while fighting if you're good enough." Arthur watched in amazement as the clots of mana were drawn to the lady's body and, penetrating deeper, disappeared, filling her with power. He wanted to learn how to do the same and asked to be taught this technique. Sylvia smiled, but this time not very kindly. "Humans have a very linear way of thinking about mana. Just start with small, meaningless movements and move forward," she suggested, continuing to draw mana from the outside. Art looked at his hands, not understanding what he should do and how. He clenched his fist, drawing some mana into it and distributing it throughout his body, deciding to start with this. Easier said than done. What should this even look and feel like? Mana beasts learn to do this naturally, but since humans usually awaken much later, their bodies are not capable of multitasking like that. But considering that the latter fact does not apply to you, if you practice hard, you will succeed. Art liked the idea and was a little pleased that he might be the only mage who could learn it. That's why he was ready for anything, for any training, just to learn such an important thing as absorbing mana while moving. As expected, the training turned out to be difficult not only to perform, but also to understand. If you stumble, you lose. That was the truth he lived by. Fell, rose, and fought again until the legs grew stronger, until the heart calmed down, and until the mana core began to do what the mind told it to do. Practicing this skill to its fullest extent meant being able to fight effectively while maintaining a steady internal flow of mana. Sweat is pouring, the body is shaking, but you have to continue to succeed. His hands hold tightly onto the improvised sword, and snow-white mana swirls around him, soaking into the little warrior's body. Step, swing, mana absorption continues. One more step, the flow intensifies, becomes denser and more confident. With each new movement, it becomes clearer how to absorb mana and how to pull it closer. Art stopped, not believing that he was finally getting it right. "Sylvia, I did it!" he shouted somewhere to the side, wanting to share his joy with the knight who had become so important to him, as if he were even a member of his family. But his gaze fell not on her proud smile, but on the silhouette lying by the portal. Her body lay motionless, enveloped in dissipating mana. Shock enveloped Art completely, preventing him from breathing and not allowing him to tear his eyes away from the one who, out of the kindness of her heart, decided to help. Just like that. As soon as his body was able to move again, Art immediately rushed to Sylvia. What could have happened? Who could have hurt her, and why didn't he notice? There was an unpleasant squelching sound under my feet. My foot sank into the viscous substance and stuck a little. Arthur looked down and realized that he was standing in a pool of someone else's blood. The wound was not just festering, it had opened up and was bleeding with renewed vigor, more and more with every second. Why did this happen now, when the boy was so happy that he had finally learned the technique of absorbing mana on the move? Why was it necessary to darken this day with a loss? "Sylvia, hold on!" He tried to move her, but no child or even adult had the strength to move the 4-meter knight from his place. Having put all the mana he had into his body, Art pulled the lady towards himself again, but she still resisted. He wasn't going to give up. He absorbed and then splashed out mana again, absorbing again and so on in a circle, just so that everything would work out. Finally, with a deafening crash, Sylvia's body shifted slightly, and the boy was able to turn her onto her back. The view opened up to a huge bleeding wound, which seemed to be getting worse with each passing moment. Perhaps the reason was the completed rift. Perhaps she spent too much energy on completing it. Only now did the boy realize that this was indeed the case. She did it for him, tried for him, sacrificed herself, even knowing what her help would lead to. She gave him wonderful moments all this time. She taught him new things, realizing that she would not be able to see him grow up and become a truly wonderful magician. He fell to his knees, accepting her sacrifice, but not wanting to part so easily with these beautiful moments, with this person. She maintained the portal so that Art could return to his family, to his mother and father, to his friends. So she was getting worse and worse. How could he not notice and understand this? She did all this because she loved the boy as a member of the family, getting up with him in an attempt to calm her down and show her that she was okay. Tears streamed down his face in an uncontrollable stream. How can everything be good when you are dying because of me? He did not understand, not hiding his annoyance and disappointment, first of all towards himself and his inattention. He cried longer than he could admit to himself or others. For the first time, he cried like the child he was on the outside, sobbing, hysterically, and so sincerely. "You've calmed down a little, Art." Even in this state, Sylvia waited for him to come to his senses a little to continue the conversation. They didn't have much time together left, and she wished he wouldn't blame himself for it. But how can you not blame yourself when she sacrifices herself so that Arthur can be reunited with his family? "You're doing me a favor by letting me leave this abandoned cave a little faster," the knight reassured him, smiling a little creepily but tenderly. Only the boy understood that these were just words to calm him down, so that he would not cry and let her go more easily. Her body began to glow and disintegrate into fiery particles, revealing something different, albeit similar to her previous form. "My name really doesn't suit this form, does it?" With a quiet ringing sound, vaguely reminiscent of a crackling fire, she began to sound less and less like herself. And then, from the fragments of armor, 2 white wings burst forth, cutting through the golden glow around. Then a massive head of some animal appeared with several twisted horns and a snow-white mane. Art watched in fascination as his new friend changed, trying to figure out who she really could be. The armor disintegrated completely, leaving behind only a huge snow-white beast with golden runes on its sides. "Now I look more like Sylvia," she joked, looking at the boy with snake-like eyes. The dragon, she turned out to be a dragon, a real one, who had previously been hiding under the guise of a terrible black knight. "Yes, I suppose I am the creature that humans call a dragon. But we have little time for idle chatter now that I am in this form." Sylvia walked towards the portal and continued. "I have to use my original form to finish this portal, but now that my disguise is gone, they will come soon. Is someone hunting the dragon? Or specifically Sylvia?" The portal began to shine brighter, spreading a piercing ringing throughout the cave, filling with mana many times faster. It shone like the sun, so brightly and dazzlingly that it was difficult to open your eyes. Finally, the transition was complete. Sylvia's wound opened even more. Blood flowed down the snow-white scales, but she seemed not to notice it or ignored it. Listen carefully, Art. There are a couple of things I need to tell you before we part. Her wing glowed, forming something round underneath it. In just a moment, a rainbow stone formed above Art's hands, just as glowing and shimmering as the portal. It wasn't heavy, but the boy felt like he could barely hold it due to the abundance of mana. Sylvia grabbed one of her feathers with her teeth and yanked it out, holding it out to the child. It was necessary to wrap it around the stone to hide its aura. Apparently, someone will be hunting for this too, but the dragon did not answer what it was. Instead, she buried her nose in his chest and the world began to explode with pain and new sensations. The eyes took on a new color, and the symbols that were on Sylvia's sides slid down her arms. An unbearable pain pierced the body, bursting into consciousness along with a new force that the childish consciousness could barely withstand. It will show itself when the time comes. It was unclear what exactly the dragon was talking about, the unknown stone or the new power that she had granted. Sylvia's eyes turned pale, almost transparent. Fatigue and pain oozed from them. The wound already resembled a flowing waterfall. I'm going to open a portal now. I didn't have time to choose the exact location, but you should be somewhere near each other, so hurry, the dragon instructed, ignoring the boy's words. The cave was filled with a roar and began to collapse, as if sensing that its owner was too weak to continue supporting it. Several boulders aimed straight at Art, but Sylvia covered him with her wing in time, protecting him from the debris of his former home. Another explosion was heard behind them, and a lone dark figure of an intruder appeared in the clouds of dust. Lady Sylvia, I advise you to stop being stubborn and hand it over. A shrill male voice easily managed to drown out the roar of falling rocks. The alien had the same creepy form as Sylvia had not long ago, but he gave off a dangerous vibe, even though he promised to heal the dragon's wound. The lady hid Art under her wing, masking his aura so that the boy would remain unnoticed. You've already caused us a lot of trouble since you hid here, he continued, truly not noticing the third person in the room. Time seemed to stand still. Everything around turned white from the movement of Sylvia's wing. It seemed like she had set up a barrier around them. I have something to confess, Arthur, to tell you the truth. I deliberately delayed the creation of the transportation spell so that I could spend more time with you, the dragon admitted, looking at the child a little guiltily. She didn't ask for forgiveness because they both felt good with each other, so she just asked for one more thing. Can you call me Grandma just once? Such a strange request made the boy smile stupidly, holding back tears. He asked her to go with him, to run away with him, so that they wouldn't have to part, to leave her here alone to die alone. He grabbed her by the wing, trying to pull her along with him, but in vain. Art didn't know what she had done to incur the wrath of her own kind, and asked her to leave with him right now, through the portal she had created. Her eyes filled with tears from the realization that someone treasured her so much, but she was powerless and could not fulfill the boy's request. They both knew that Sylvia couldn't just run away, follow Art somewhere into the city, to meet his family. Here and now, she had to answer for everything. She tore the wing from the child's hands with ease and annoyance, interrupting the farewell scene. Goodbye, Art, the dragon whispered, pushing the boy into the spatial transition, regretting only that the time spent together was not enough. Flying into the unknown, he screamed, cried, called her to come with him, but it was too late. They had already parted forever. Her blurred silhouette will remain in his memory forever. Grandma! The boy's voice reached Sylvia, mixing with the hum of the portal and the echoes from it. It seems that now there is no turning back. They have done everything they could for each other. The barrier fell. The cave continued to collapse, but the dragon continued to sit motionless in the very epicenter. They became each other's family, support, and salvation. But now they must continue their journey alone. Before Art's eyes, the lights of the portal kept flickering, reminiscent of the northern lights he had seen in his past life. Finally, everything faded, giving way to a sky painted in the colors of the sunset. The boy lay in the middle of an unfamiliar forest, all alone, abandoned or rescued. It was not clear. He understood that he would remember Sylvia. Even if she turned out to be a criminal, he would love her, even after decades. A cold, gloomy forest, the proximity of night, and therefore danger. But Art didn't care. She was gone. Sylvia was gone and would never come back. This thought sounded like an alarm in his head, repeating itself with new force. Out of helplessness, he squeezed the grass, tearing it out by the roots, so as not to let his emotions spill out, but they were stronger. He screamed, heart-rendingly, loudly, realizing that there would not be a single chance to meet her again. His cry frightened the birds and made the forest tremble, stirred up by the uninvited guest. Emotions burst out. Helplessness covered him completely. But he could do nothing but cry. Only remember her until the end of his days. Memories of the 4 months spent with Sylvia swirled through my head. So long, but so little time to get our fill of each other, to get to know each other better. Sylvia treated Arthur like a member of the family. She taught him what he had been missing since he came into this world. My thoughts were interrupted by the beating of my own heart, drowning out everything that was around me. Unnaturally loud, strong, and fast, from which the boy jumped up, not understanding what was happening. Test, okay, hi, Art. A familiar voice sounded in my head, replacing the hissing. He couldn't believe it. The dragon was talking to him again, which meant she was still alive. This is Sylvia. If you're listening to this now, it means I have shown you who I really am. The joy turned to disappointment. She didn't survive, though. She just recorded the message in advance, before she finished the portal, and she passed it on along with the power and the stone, most likely. As unpleasant as it may be, you are not even close to ready for the whole truth, the recording continued, forcing you to listen to every word. Your body is that of a boy who is only 4 years old, and although your mana core has already reached the crimson stage, you are not strong enough. It was offensive to hear such words, but the boy understood that it was the pure truth. As a small parting gift, I have invested my unique gift in you. Your future development as a mage depends on how well you can use my gift. He didn't ask for such a gift. He would have preferred to have Sylvia by his side. As she wrote this message, she already understood what Art might be feeling. Anger, sadness, guilt. Remember that you have a family to take care of and a purpose to fulfill in this life. All I wish is for you to embrace the joys of childhood and become a person that your parents and I will be proud of. The stone wrapped in a dragon feather caught his attention. Sylvia promised that when Art's mana core passed the white stage, he would hear her again, and then she would explain everything. Until then, I bid you farewell, King Grey. This address shocked Arthur. How did she know his name from his past life? She couldn't see right through him, spy on his thoughts or anything like that, so where did that come from? Could it be that Sylvia had more secrets than one could imagine? Questions continued to torment Art long after the dragon's voice disappeared. How long ago did she know his identity and from where? One thing was clear. She was right in everything she taught. If Art had once again become mired in a sense of revenge, this life would have been no different from the previous one. Now he has family and friends, close and dear people, for whom he is ready to move forward and only forward. But first, he had to figure out where the dragon had taken him and how to get out of here, which way to go. Before him appeared a huge forest with massive trees, the branches of which were easy to move along. Then, Art decided to look around and, gathering mana around himself, strengthened his body and rushed forward. Mana added not only strength and endurance, but also speed and agility to his movements. Rushing towards one of the giant trees, the boy literally ran up the vertical trunk and caught hold of one of the branches. Pulling himself up easily, he looked around, looking for a place where he needed to move on. Even from a great height, it was not clear what was behind the tree trunks. Vision, despite the invested mana, was also limited. But the conclusion about the location was obvious. Arthur was in the very depths of the Elshire Forest, the forest where the kingdom of the elves is hidden. Having chosen the right side, the boy again gathered mana around him and prepared to move on. Due to the aura of the forest, the boy had difficulty using the mana rotation that Sylvia had taught him. He could use magic for much longer, but he still wondered how he got here. The dragon promised to send him closer to his parents. Does this mean that they are somewhere in the territory of the Elven Kingdom? It doesn't matter, you just need to keep looking around. Other people should be somewhere nearby. Art noted with a smile that he was quite good at climbing trees, just like a monkey. And then the silence of the forest was cut by a scream, similar to a woman's, even a child's. Finally, Arthur found the people Sylvia had spoken of. He immediately rushed towards the sound, trying to move quickly but quietly just in case, so as not to fall behind, but also not to give himself away. Finally, a cart drawn by wolf monsters appeared below, and people stood next to it. The boy hoped that they would be able to take him with them, but stopped, noticing something wrong. They were a bit suspicious, but at that distance it was hard to see who they were talking to or what they were carrying. Jump lower onto a branch, still hard to see. Even closer, it's better to hide the mana so as not to reveal yourself in case these people's intentions are not the best. And finally, he landed on the branch closest to the ground and immediately hid behind the trunk, listening to the conversation. Now it became clear that there were 4 men, and their clothes were more reminiscent of something he had already seen once, a couple of months ago, on bandits. Pouring some mana into his ears, Arthur heightened his hearing to understand what they were talking about. "Someone help!" squeaked a thin child's voice, followed by the disgruntled muttering of men and a sharp blow. "Let's get ready to leave. Only a few days separate us from this damned forest." The bandits continued as if nothing had happened, angering the boy even more. They discussed selling an elf, a child who could be sold for more than others because she was a virgin. The leader ordered to throw the girl into the carriage and move on quickly, and that is what they did. This shocked and angered Art so much that his seemingly weak fingers left real furrows in the tree bark. Slavers are the worst of people, and lately the boy has been encountering more and more of this world's filth, as if to remind him that not all people are good. From afar, he noticed a long, pointed ear framed by silver hair that belonged to an elven girl who looked to be about 10 years old. He had no idea how the bandits had managed to get their hands on the forest hounds, but he knew for sure that getting one of them out would be the ticket out of this forest. 4 slavers. With everything that's happened to Art lately, it looks like he'll finally be able to blow off some steam. Despite his desire to return home, he still needs a plan, and dealing with these guys is the best solution. But Art didn't hit him right away. That would have been suicide even for him. He decided to follow them and wait for a convenient opportunity to separate them and knock them out one by one. Art sat on a branch above their campsite and gathered strength, watching their movements, waiting for the best moment. Finally, they began to disperse, and there might not be another such case. He picked one of the berries hanging nearby. It would come in handy. After examining the fruit, I realized that it was dense and heavy enough to produce the desired sound. The improvised projectile hit the tree trunk with a loud sound, attracting the attention of the horned wolves. "Shut them up before these dogs wake up everyone in the forest," one of the bandits muttered discontentedly, sending the second one to check what was going on there. Without weapons, Arthur will be forced to use the technique from his past life. Although he wasn't sure that the technique would work in that world, he didn't have much of a choice. "You should just chew on each other's horns if you're so bored." The bandit laughed at the stupid animals, shaking a hefty piece of meat in front of their faces. He didn't hear the child jump down behind him, and only just before the blow did he turn around, meeting the eyes of his death. A wave of the hand, a quick cut. The bandit doesn't even have time to understand what happened. A thin line of blood appears on his neck, where it wasn't there just a moment ago. The boy pulls at the jacket, wanting to take it for himself so that he can at least get some clothes on. The slaver finally realizes what has happened, but it is too late, his head rolling back with a frozen grimace of horror on his face. "Thank you for the weapon," Art thanked, taking a heavy dagger from the defeated man's pocket. Throwing the body aside like vile and useless trash, the boy turned to the remaining bandits. The wolves, sensing fresh blood, began to slowly approach the prey, even though it did not resist, simply could not. And they realized this, pounced on their recent tormentor, biting into his flesh with their teeth and tearing him to pieces. The full slave trader was still waiting for his companion to return, sincerely not understanding what he could be doing for so long, since the dogs had long since fallen silent. As he approached the tree, he failed to notice the dark silhouette of the boy hiding behind the trunk, and this became his fatal mistake. Frightened by the rustle, the bandit jerked and immediately sank down under the weight of the child who had landed on his shoulders. Arthur gagged him and, whispering goodbye, cut his throat. As expected, fighting in this body was much harder and more tiring, so Arthur decided that he should finish everything quickly while the other 2 were sleeping. And then from the cart came an indistinct hissing, followed by screams. The captive woke up at the wrong time. Why now, when everything was going so smoothly, as luck would have it? The 2 remaining bandits emerged from a nearby tent, trying to figure out where their comrades were and why there was so much noise. The boy hurried to hide, looking around the area and changing his plan on the go. One of the robbers noticed movement behind him and immediately reacted. Unfortunately for Art, the robber repelled the child's attack just in time and wanted to attack in response, but didn't have time. Dash, the boy puts mana into his body to become faster. 3 ready, he exhales as he moves, cutting the tendons under his opponent's knees and ankles with a thread of mana. Only this time it didn't work out quietly. The bandit screamed loudly, attracting the attention of the leader. He immediately rushed towards the sound, drawing his sword from its sheath as he went. "Be careful, Danton. The boy is a magician," the unfinished man warned, trying to hold the boy back and help his partner. He grinned, smelling the scent of a large catch, and immediately thought that a gifted boy could fetch a lot of money. So the robber threw away his sword so as not to spoil the goods. "We don't want to accidentally break the golden egg that just landed in front of us, you know," he explained his actions, pulling mana into his palms. He really could have brought them much more money than the little elf. Don't die, kid. Just a moment, and the magician is already behind the boy, ready to grab and kill at any moment. But the training was not in vain. Art managed to jump back and roll to the side, immediately getting into a fighting stance. The bandit did not give up. He attacked again, as if he did not even notice the resistance. And then someone else's shoe hit him in the face. It was more humiliating than painful. There was a distinct red mark on his face, resembling the sole of a boot. Blood oozed from his cut lip, and his gaze was full of rage. The blade flashed, enveloped in a dense flow of mana, repeating the trick with which Arthur had once pulled the magician into flight. Only, unlike the previous one, this magician managed to intercept the blade. This became Art's fatal mistake, because now he was like a dog on a leash, the other end of the leash in the hands of the enemy. It seems that with this action, Arthur only angered his opponent. Or maybe he became interested because his eyes lit up with interest and excitement. "Here is your weapon. Catch it." With these words, he threw the dagger back towards the boy, who did not have time to react. Fast? His movements are almost invisible. That's what a man is. One who has been through more than one battle, hardened in combat. "Good reaction, kid," the slave trader praised, kicking the child in the stomach and sending him flying. Having flown a few meters, Arthur landed with his back to the ground and, having traveled a little more, finally braked. "Come here, my bag of gold," the slave trader beckoned to the boy, suddenly appearing next to him. He grabbed him by the leg so that he couldn't escape, and it would have been all over if Arthur hadn't been himself. "Just give up. You can't do anything with your little body," the bandit continued, ignoring the muffled twitches of his prey. The blade-like mana condensation seemed to behave similarly to the wind magic in this world. And if that was the case, fire magic should also be similar to something. Seizing the opportunity, Arthur grabbed the bandit's hand, pouring fire magic into his palms. The slave trader didn't understand what the boy was doing, so he simply continued to watch, in vain. Another second and the explosion enveloped them both, engulfing the affected limb in a fiery trap. Now Danton is angry, even furious. The prey has just burned his hand, depriving itself of the chance to survive. Art wastes no time, finding his dagger in the dust and smoke and preparing for another finishing attack. Only now the boy is already behind. The air smells of fire and death. A dagger, accurately fired towards the slave trader, pierces his throat through and through, and finally, all the bandits were finished. In torn clothes, covered in soot and blood, Arthur stood over the fallen man like a hero who had achieved his goal and taken revenge. Even if this is not the revenge, it has made things easier for many, and now they can live on peacefully. The surviving bandit begged Art not to touch him, but he ignored the pleas, saying only that their captive had asked the same thing. And so he finally reached the cart and saw in it a little elf, beaten, tied up, shaking with fear. He extended his hand to her, smiling radiantly and assuring her that it was no longer dangerous and that she could return home. The baby cried from the fear she had experienced. From pain and from happiness, she was saved. She really would return to her family. The girl remembered everything that happened to her, how they blindfolded her, how they ordered her not to remove the blindfold so that she would not see what was happening around her and where they were taking her. At first there were screams, then there was silence, and someone's voice said that everything was fine. That a boy much younger than her had really been able to deal with all the bandits? Or is this another deception, thrown up by a clouded consciousness? But no, there he was, the sweet boy, right in front of her face, the hero who saved her. "Thank you," the green-eyed girl said shyly, pulling the bandage lower. "It was nice to meet you, bye," Arthur said, shocking the elf, and was about to leave. But the girl grabbed onto his already torn clothes, not allowing him to take a single step and surprising him with her remarkable strength. Everything was written all too clearly on her face. "I'm scared, don't go. How can you leave such a sweet little girl in the forest?" "Listen, I need to go home too. Those bad guys certainly won't be chasing you anymore." Art tried to object and explain his position, but in vain. Elves should be safe in this forest, so why is she still so scared? The little girl quickly shook her head, denying both the boy's words and thoughts, to which he had nothing to say in response. "Animals are only afraid of adults," she explained sheepishly, blushing and trying not to even look in the direction of her interlocutor. "It turns out that hounds and tree golems eat children, even elven ones, so the forest is as unsafe for the girl as it is for any human." "Okay, at least you know how long it will take to get to where you live," Arthur said indignantly, already half a step away from agreeing. She didn't know what was worse than if she had said it would take a year. He asked the girl to stay where she was, and he went to check which of the slave trader's things might be useful to him. He simply hoped that the trip would not drag on for years and that he would be able to safely bring her home. after which he would continue his journey to his family. The girl finally realized that he agreed to help her and could not help but be happy about this, agreeing to wait a little. Half an hour later, Arthur finally collected everything that could be useful on the trip. None of them knew how long the trip would take, so they had to think about the return as well. They couldn't take the cart with them, but maybe it was for the best because the boy remembered that they made his legs hurt terribly. Instead, he cut the reins of the hounds, releasing them into the wild. The animals had just finished eating one of the bandits and began to slowly wander through the forest. Arthur hoped that in gratitude, the elves would help him return to the human kingdom, to his parents. Having checked his things once more, the boy returned to his companion, who had already managed to make friends with the glowing butterfly, a child of the forest after all. He handed the elf the clothes he had found in the cart, which had obviously belonged to her before, and a cloak since it would soon become quite cold. The girl thanked her savior again and got ready to change. She only slowed down because the boy decided to pat her on the head, which made her feel like she wasn't actually the eldest one here. "Let's take you home." He seemed to even start to like the idea, giving the girl a beaming smile and turning away, giving her the opportunity to change. Walking in the vague direction indicated by the elf, he was able to learn a little about her. For example, that her name was Tessia Erlith, and he also told how he ended up in this forest. There were times when he had to step away from conversations and protect the girl. It was as if she only now realized that he was a human, since he came from the human kingdom. Sometimes she asked very strange questions, for example, is it true that human men are perverts and have several wives? Because that's what her grandfather said. I'm sure there are perverts among the elves too. And in general, do you even know the meaning of the word pervert? She didn't know. She just repeated her grandfather's words. I had to explain that only some nobles have several wives, and not always. Arta, in turn, was interested in life in Eleanor, to which the girl replied that the kingdom of the elves was quite fun, although she spent most of her time with her grandfather and guardians, because her mother and father were always busy. It also turned out that she had not yet awakened, but as soon as this happened, she would be given a mentor for training. It turns out that Eleanor has a very good education, since a mentor is assigned to each awakened one. It was surprising and at the same time made me wonder why people couldn't do the same. It was a very good solution. At some point, Tess became interested in what happened to the people who kidnapped her. She had to say that they got into a rather unpleasant situation and promised that she would never see them again, which is understandable. Finally, they stopped for a rest, but the girl still did not close her eyes, although she nodded off as she walked. Arthur promised that he would guard her peace and that she had nothing to fear, because he was nearby and could protect her. While the elf slept, Arthur used this time to find out what kind of will Sylvia left him. Tess leaned out of the tent again, calling the boy modestly to her. Grandpa said never to share a bed with a boy, but I won't tell him, so climb in. You need your rest too. She has an interesting grandfather. The boy, of course, refused, citing the fact that he did not need sleep and returned to his thoughts. She was still a little embarrassed that she was the only one resting, so she tried to persuade her savior once again. I just remembered that the animals will most likely attack if they notice you are here because they love children, and Art should be afraid of that. Maybe you should guard the tent from the inside. It seems she's just afraid to be alone. The boy understood this and smiled, increasingly realizing that he could not resist her. Tess tried to prove with words that she was not scared, but it was obvious from the trembling throughout her body. Arthur crouched down next to her, listening to his surroundings and listening for sounds that could be dangerous. The little girl still didn't sleep. She watched his actions, his gaze and the aura that swirled around him. Art didn't notice her attention right away, concentrating on the matter at hand. He smiled, as if promising that everything would be fine and that she had nothing to fear as long as he was around. A couple of minutes later, having grabbed the boy's surviving pant leg, the elf finally fell asleep. She had a hard time. Not every adult can endure that, so let her rest. Tomorrow is a new day. The morning coolness enveloped the forest, flowing through the grass like a thick fog. Life was awakening all around. Animals were running. Hounds were looking for prey. They paid absolutely no attention to the tent in which two children were sleeping peacefully. The boys continued their journey as soon as they woke up, the unfamiliar surroundings and the quickly passing time being their only progress. They made their way deeper and deeper into the forest, occasionally cutting their way through with a dagger. After the first conversation, Tessia's fears finally passed, and it became clear that she had no idea how to communicate with Art. She was simply embarrassed and a little afraid of a 4-year-old boy who could defeat 4 grown men. They walked and walked. The days dragged on and the forest did not change, and it was unclear when the time would finally come when they could finally rest. Worries about his family and impatience to return home did not leave Arthur, spoiling his mood every time. But he still kept moving forward because he had promised. He didn't want to leave Tess in the situation he found himself in. Another halt. The logs in the fire crackled loudly, destroying the silence of the forest and not allowing the night coolness to reach the lonely travelers. Arthur set up the tent, listening to the sounds around him. The sound of metal clanging as the axe fell from the boy's weakened hands. Again, it is an attack, making the journey almost unbearable. The excruciating pain emanating from Arthur's mana core was completely unpredictable and could overtake him at any moment. It was unclear why the core behaved this way, so I just had to endure it and try to make sure Tess didn't notice anything. Or she simply didn't understand, because it was almost impossible to hide the attacks. It's just that every time Arthur said that everything was fine, that his head was spinning or something like that. Of course, the elf didn't believe it, but she didn't insist on explanations, just hoping that everything would work out. And so another night, everything was quiet around. Tess was sleeping peacefully in the tent. Arthur sat next to her, trying not to wake her with his moans. The pain covered my head, not even allowing me to breathe. This time it was almost unbearable, but as always, it passed quickly enough. It's good that relief doesn't take long to come, but the only bad thing is that the attacks become more frequent. The next morning, they continued on their way as if nothing had happened. Even though Arthur smiled and pretended nothing had happened, Tess was far from stupid, and not blind because the boy could not always hide. They wandered deeper and deeper into the forest, the trunks crowded together, turning into an impassable wall. The animals were afraid to approach the travelers, and if they did dare, they immediately ran away, frightened by the weapons made of mana that were fired at them. At such moments, Arthur was truly terrifying, because the others quickly learned that they would become prey if they came even one step closer than allowed. Tess ran from tree to tree, looking for something on their bark, which Arthur watched with a smile and interest. Another attack came as unexpectedly as usual. The closer Eleanor got, the more often they became and the longer they didn't pass. Maybe there is some connection between these facts. Tessia pretended not to notice anything and was just waiting, while Arthur increasingly thought about telling her about his core. But he pushed the thought aside, afraid that the girl would worry. The days passed. Day gave way to night. The same stops began to tire a little, but in the morning a long road awaited again. More and more often, the elf noticed that Art was the first to fall asleep, exhausted during the day to the point of losing his vigilance. As they progressed, Tessia began to recognize more and more familiar places. However, the pace slowed as the elf quickly became exhausted. The boy took some of her luggage, lightening the load so that they could walk a little faster and further. As for Arthur himself, even despite strengthening his body with mana, things were getting harder. The pain continued to increase and it became almost impossible to hide it from her worried companion. I even had to get involved in embarrassing situations just to distract her and bring out her emotions. He ate too much and needed to go to the toilet. Boys his age have such pains. It's normal, part of the growing up process and so on. And she believed it, or pretended to. Perhaps he thought she was a stupid child. But women of any age were quite perceptive, especially elven ones. Another day, Tess decided to start the conversation she had been putting off all this time. She tugged at her companion's jacket sleeve, attracting his attention. Since we became close friends, I was wondering if I could call you Art, like your family does? He didn't mind, and didn't even show much interest in her question, which slightly offended the girl. She was so afraid to ask, afraid of being refused, but it turned out that her fears were unfounded. I'll be very flattered if Tessia Aerolith calls this village boy Art. The boy quickly changed his answer, slightly overplaying his emotions. Another squabble began. You talk like some old man, and you're a crybaby who can't even go to the toilet alone without me, with her eyes and ears closed. And so on. It would have ended in a fight if they hadn't been children and dependent on each other. And then on one of the nearby trees, a greenish letter T appeared, as if carved into the bark. Tess noticed her by chance but was immediately inspired. This was what they had been looking for so long. A landmark that should lead them to the kingdom of the elves. But Art did not see it. The mental age difference was great, apparently because the boy remembered his past life. Maybe that's why Tess didn't always understand her companion's sarcasm. And he considered her a child and thought that her behavior was just childish. But now she looked quite serious, albeit joyful. The elf ran from one tree trunk to another, putting her hand to them in turn. Finally, she stopped at one of the tree trunks, and it seemed to Arthur that her ears began to twitch like a dog's. Art still didn't understand why she was so happy, but he was in no hurry to say anything. The forest was immersed in a drawn-out hissing sound, which was emitted by one of the tree trunks, as if it imagined itself to be a rattlesnake. Only now did the boy see a greenish glow emanating from the mana around the tree, whose trunk suddenly split, revealing a small passage to the travelers. It glowed brighter, as if welcoming visitors and inviting them inside. A joyful Tessia extended her hand to Arthur, inviting him to go with her into the unknown. The passage turned out to be a teleporter, mercilessly throwing the unprepared boy right face down onto the pavement. Stonework. That's good. It means they finally reached the city of the elves. Tess smiled contentedly, finally feeling at peace that she was finally home. They stood in the middle of the square near a small portal that looked like an ordinary door, surrounded by elves interested in what was happening. Arda was amazed by what he saw in front of him. A huge multi-story city built right on the trees, houses on the branches, connected by suspension bridges, and all this above a huge square paved with smooth stones with several fountains. Compared to all this splendor, the children were like ants running across Xyrus. Untouched, a place belonging to nature, the elves who did not subjugate it but submitted lived in peace and harmony. From somewhere above, a wind blew, filled with a dense flow of mana. Right in front of them, a spiral was swirling, vaguely resembling a whirlpool but in the air. Its center began to sparkle and crackle like logs in a fire. Art was about to take up the blade, but Tess stopped him from acting rashly. The light fell to the feet of the men who emerged from it, who immediately fell to one knee, showing respect. "Welcome back, Crown Princess," their voices thundered, striking the boy to the depths of his soul. A minute's pause, and it finally dawns on him who he saved and who he had been escorting home all this time. But he still couldn't believe this indisputable fact, stupidly blinking his eyes and looking first at the elf, then at the bent soldiers. The girl just nodded, confirming their words and the boy's thoughts. "Princess, we arrived as soon as we noticed that the royal teleportation gate was used," one of the soldiers began to speak, but was interrupted by a woman jumping out of an approaching carriage. "My child, Tessia," she cried, getting a few steps ahead of the man who had jumped out after her. They were Alduin Aerolith and Marial Aerolith, King and Queen of Eleanor, and Tess's parents. An elderly man followed them out, but was in no hurry to approach the little princess, preferring to examine her companion. It was Virian Aerolith, the former king of Eleanor, who led the last war against the humans. His name is noted in all the history books. His face showed that he was not in a very friendly mood. The war could not help but leave its mark on his perception. But suddenly he smiled, dispelling all of Arthur's fears. The boy pushed his friend, who was frozen next to him, towards his parents so that she would finally reveal her emotions to them. Fear of being kidnapped, relief from her unexpected rescue, and joy from traveling with a new friend, she threw herself into her parents' arms, burning with impatience to tell them everything and more. The parents clung to the girl, as if afraid that she would disappear again. Arthur suddenly wondered if his mom and dad would react the same way when they saw him alive and well on their doorstep. "Thank you, child. Not only as King Eleanor, but also as this girl's father. As a small gesture of gratitude for helping Tessia, please come into our home," the man invited, regaining his appearance befitting a monarch. "You can rest for a while, and then please tell us what happened." His gaze changed, became piercing and a little angry, but this anger was not directed at Art. The gentle tone might have fooled someone else, but not the former king. His offer was an order, an explicit one. So Arthur decided to agree and bow to accept the gesture of goodwill, but Tess did not understand the subtlety of the conversation and simply pulled the boy towards her, inviting him into the house. All the soldiers, parents, and even passers-by were shocked by her behavior, but also understood what it was connected with. She wanted to show her savior so much, she was so happy to return home, that she completely forgot how a child of the royal family, a princess, should behave. Art expected to see an impressive castle when he learned that Tess was a princess, but the reality surprised him much more. The snow-white castle, hanging in the air, as if entwined with one of the most massive trees, towered over the rest of the city as a sign of greatness. Inside, everything was a little simpler, but no less magnificent. Even the maids on either side of the velvet carpet, bowing in respect, seemed like something fantastic. Artu even felt like he was in some kind of novel from his past life. "This child is our guest, please wash him and take him to the restroom," the queen gave instructions. "Thank you, but first I would like to explain what happened." The refusal of hospitality is a terrible insult, but the king and queen accepted his wish as a matter of course. They exchanged only a brief glance and invited the boy to follow them into the living room. A couple of corridors, a staircase, and here they are, sitting in a spacious hall with a long table in the middle. The contented queen braided her daughter's hair while the men talked among themselves. At the head of the table sat the king, surrounded by a retinue of knights. To his right is Virian, who has just lit his pipe and is waiting for a story. Everyone was ready to listen attentively to the boy who was able to save the only princess of the Elven Kingdom. My name is Arthur Levin. I am from a humble town in the Kingdom of Sapin. It is a great honor for me to be in the presence of the royal family, Arthur began, bowing respectfully to the monarchs. He knew the discussion wouldn't move forward if adults continued to treat him like a child. Despite your supposedly humble origins, you seem quite mature and well-educated, Arthur Levin. That's very good. Now I'd like to hear what happened. The king cleared his throat and assessed the boy's efforts. So Arthur began the story of his journey, beginning with a vague explanation of how he was separated from his family before meeting the bandits and Tess. He did not lie, but he did not tell the whole truth, revealing only what could satisfy the curiosity of his listeners. Inevitably, as the story progressed and approached the meeting with the princess, the atmosphere changed. The king was furious that his daughter had been kidnapped by slave traders. The boy objected, even though it could cost him his life. Slave trading is a profession, not a race, Your Majesty, Art said, clutching his pant leg, implying that bandits were not limited to humans. The sound of metal clanging could be heard, which could not help but tense and heat up the atmosphere even more. It was the soldiers who drew their swords, displeased with the words spoken by the human child. So you saw my granddaughter taken by slavers, and as a child you talked to them, begged for mercy or whatever, Tess's grandfather began, sincerely not believing that a 4-year-old could do anything more serious. No, Elder Virion. Even though I am a child, I am still a mage. I destroyed the slave traders and saved your granddaughter. Now Art's story became even more implausible. One of the soldiers, considering his story to be a lie, drew his sword, intending to stop the nonsense, but was stopped. With just a look filled with power and authority, the former King Virion forced the man not only to put away his blade, but also to become ashamed and silent. Goosebumps ran through his body and did not leave him even after the elder lost all interest in him. The boy stood up, attracting the attention of those gathered, realizing that his words needed to be confirmed. Otherwise, no one would believe him. Whether you believe me or not, Princess Tessia has returned safely. His eyes said more than words could express. All I want now is to return to my family in Sapin. Art, you're about to leave. The little elf suddenly interrupted the conversation, jumping up from her seat. It seems that her parents are increasingly horrified by her unexpected behavior, which either did not happen before or they simply did not notice. Virion seemed pleased and was already thinking about inviting Arthur to stay longer. Knowing history, I don't think a person should stay in this kingdom for too long, Princess. He wanted to leave quickly, to return to his parents, but he couldn't refuse his friend so directly. Also, my priority is to make sure my family is safe and that they know I'm okay too, he explained vaguely. His words made the king think. Despite the past of the two kingdoms, you saved our daughter and took it upon yourself to accompany her until her return. So we must provide you with a worthy reward. He drawled thoughtfully, his gaze sliding to Tess. The girl waited for her parents' decision, clinging closer to her mother. Unfortunately, the teleportation gate connected to the Sapin Kingdom is only accessible once every 7 years, during the summit conference between the 3 races. He was apparently talking about the gate that Arthur and Tessia came from. It turns out that there are still 5 years until they open, which is quite a long time. However, the royal family was prepared to send a group of guards to escort the boy home safe and sound. The king was hospitable enough, but warned that some of them were tolerant enough, but too many still harbored resentment towards humans because of a war that had happened long ago. He decided that he would prepare an escort for the following morning, but for now he suggested that the boy rest in the room allocated to him. Arthur accepted this generous gesture with gratitude, wanting more and more to meet his family as soon as possible. He was led into a room that was striking in its luxury and splendor, and the dirty, shabby boy was so out of place for her that the scene became more and more comical with every second. But he was too tired to focus on such things, so he simply decided to go to the bathroom. Standing under the shower, he felt like a king. Not the one he once was, but the master of fortune. He spent so much time in the forest, and now he stands in a luxurious room, under hot streams of water. Isn't that happiness? But it didn't last long. The body was shot through by the already familiar pain. Surprisingly, it had never overtaken him before. He doubled over, realizing that it was getting worse and worse each time. Already sitting on the sofa, wrapped in a warm robe, the boy thought about what Sylvia had left him. He thought of her every time he reached a dead end, asking himself what he should do, as if expecting her to answer. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door, which Art quickly answered. Tess stood on the threshold with the obvious intention of saying or expressing something. But instead, the girl unexpectedly hit the boy in the stomach, using her head instead of her hands. "You idiot! First you talk coldly to my family and then you leave. It seems she decided to speak out too. But he wasn't cold. It was just politeness. I had to remind her that he was just a man, a commoner, and that her parents were the king and queen of the elves. And in general, she could say that she was a princess, to which the girl only grinned, scratching her temple. She just didn't want him to leave because he became her first friend. Her shoulders were shaking with fear and the desire to stay with him a little longer because otherwise she would be left completely alone again, and Art understood this. Even though she is a child and her actions are sometimes misleading, Tessia is still a good girl. So instead of trying to calm or convince the elf, the boy asked to show her the castle so he could spend more time with her for the last time. They walked down a long, open corridor hung with crystal chandeliers, Tessia's favorite place. The corridor led to a small balcony, planted with flowers that, according to the girl, bloom in the spring. At least she was glad that he could see the glowing bees which looked like fireflies. She gathered them in her palms, showing her friend the insects merged into a single lump of light. This spectacle was truly striking in its beauty. The boy held out his hands, accepting the little bundle of light, not believing that something simple could be so beautiful. And then the night silence was cut by a ringing sound. A knife was flying towards them, fired from somewhere in the darkness. Arthur pulled Tessia down, out of harm's way. At the same time, the boy intercepted the weapon, immediately throwing it back. The whistle of the wind from the speed and force of his throw was astonishing and a little frightening, but he couldn't drown out the other's quick steps. An attacker flew up to Art and was about to hit him, but the boy blocked his fist and only now paid attention to the one who had so unexpectedly attacked them in the very center of the castle. Surprise gave way to disbelief and then to suspicion. A satisfied elder stood before him, greeting the guest as if nothing had happened. "What the hell, you just tried to kill your own granddaughter," the boy raged. But the former king assured him that it was just a toy and that the most it could do was give him a small bruise. Only now did the boy notice the funny shaking object in his hand. "Excellent reaction and instincts. To think you caught my little gift and even used it against me." The elder seemed to be genuinely amused and did not even hide his interest. He noted that the mana usage was rather mediocre, but it was clear that Arthur could indeed kill 4 slavers. There really was something wrong with this old man. But Tessa's voice, asking her grandfather not to tease her friend, distracted her thoughts. But he didn't think he was teasing anyone. He checked and hoped that Arthur understood this, but the boy did not. "It's been a while since I've met anyone interesting," the elder said, looking the child over from head to toe. He swings his arm and a wooden sword appears above his hand. It looks like he wants to spar. The boy accepted the challenge, intending not only to demonstrate his skills, but also to prove that he was stronger than any child or even an adult. Tessia was not thrilled with their idea and even tried to stop them, but she couldn't do anything about it. Mana coiled around Virion, thickening and condensing, turning into something like a wall. The boy swung the blade, filling it with energy, preparing for sparring. A jerk. The blade glides through the air as if not noticing his resistance. A blow, but only the cape thrown off during the move flies off to the side. The elder is already behind, raising his fist to strike. Arthur felt the old man aiming at his neck, turned sharply and prepared to counterattack. The boy did not expect the old man to be such a fast and strong opponent. His attacks made your legs buckle. It seemed like he was pressing not only with his entire weight, but also with the atmosphere. Art noticed that Virion was about to hit him in the face with his other hand. He jumped to the side and the elder, having lost his support, moved a little forward. The many battles he had fought in did not allow the former king to fall for such a trick and not notice the approaching danger. Arthur flew to the side, knocked down by his opponent's elbow, and, having slid a couple of meters, was about to jump up. He just didn't notice at all that in the heat of battle he had lost his sword. Quickly correcting the situation, the boy moved back, clutching the blade in his hand. The blows rained down one after another. The booming sounds of the wood touching the elder's hands did not allow the birds to sleep peacefully. Even with mana and minimal movement, Art was no match for a seasoned warrior. He couldn't keep up with him, no matter how much he wanted to. And now the old man is behind again raising the limit of his speed. Arthur's instincts helped him dodge, but the advantage was still on Virion's side. Finally, the boy felt like he had a chance to win. The elder tripped him, but the boy jumped up in time, arching his back. It seemed as if he was about to take off. His movements were blurred, and it was difficult for outside observers to notice them. So Tess still didn't understand what was happening and couldn't follow the movements of the fighters. Art grabbed the sword in midair and, gripping it tighter, poured in mana. His body spun, building up speed and momentum, but it wasn't enough. The wooden blade only slightly scratched the enemy's forehead and flew off to the side. The old man, frozen in surprise, looked at the boy who had fallen next to him with a mixture of disbelief and delight. It was the first time he had met someone so strong, and yet so young. The frightened elf immediately rushed to her friend and grandfather, realizing that the battle was over. The boy did not understand what had just happened and why at the last moment the elder froze, as if deliberately allowing himself to be hit. "I guess I deserve it for my arrogance to think you were actually able to land a blow on me," Virian chuckled, rubbing his bruised forehead. Tessia was clearly unhappy with his actions, but she only sulked. "Now let's start round 2. But the elf decided that he had teased her friend enough and it was time to finish, painfully pinching the grandfather on the stomach. They started arguing. Tess believed that Art needed to be softer. Grandfather claimed that if he had been softer, Arthur would have been the one making fun of him, and the boy himself was simply pleased that Virian thought so highly of him. The elder's mood changed dramatically because of his words, but the reason remained unclear. "Become my student," he suddenly suggested, looking at the boy completely seriously. Arthur, frozen in surprise, swallowed all the words and thought. Only the elf didn't understand what they were talking about and what was going on here. Virian was in no hurry, patiently waiting for an answer. Finally, shock gave way to disbelief. The boy froze and made a displeased face, sincerely believing that they were simply making fun of him. "First of all, I'm a human. Humans aren't allowed to stay in this kingdom at all," he tried to object, but to no avail. "No one will dare to throw you out while you are under my care." And his words sounded so convincing that there was no doubt about their truth. "I know you understand that you are already better than other children, even some adults. Just know that I can teach you what even the most capable mages of Sapin cannot teach you." Sounded good, but Arthur still doubted, and he had reasons for that. And it was that the parents still didn't know that everything was okay with the boy, but the old man had something to say to that. He offered to talk to them, believing that this would be quite enough. Just as Arthur wanted to clarify how exactly he was going to do this, Virian was distracted by Tessia falling asleep and ordered the maid standing nearby to take her to him. "I understand that I am a little impatient, but this is related to what I felt during our little sparring. You had attacks of burning pain where the mana core is, and these attacks are happening more and more often." At that moment, it seemed like the old man saw right through the boy. How did he find out about this? Does he really know the reasons? And if he knows, then he can help fix it. It turned out that the reason was hidden in the will of the beast, and the old elf was surprised that Art was not familiar with such a concept. He had never heard such a term, but for some reason he immediately remembered Sylvia and what she had given him as a parting gift. He has encountered mana beasts before and knows that they are divided into classes. A beast strong enough to be classified as Class A or higher is given the ability to pass on their will or inherent ability only once, either to their offspring or to the person they are attached to, the elder explained and continued. "I won't pry how you came across such a strong beast, but at this stage, the power within you is doing more harm than good." It was obvious that he was not speaking from a book, but from his own experience. Virian confirmed this, calling himself a beast tamer, whatever that means. It is a title that can be earned by defeating the monstrous beast within, in Arthur's case, a dragon. "I know how important it is for you to return to your family, but doing so now is very risky. The power of your bestial will is too great for your immature body. If you don't control it soon, the power you've received will destroy your body." So this is the gift Sylvia left for Arthur. She wanted to make him stronger. She didn't want to harm him, but she condemned him to suffer until he achieved his goal.